Good morning, everybody. It is Friday, February 16th, 2024. This is a special budget meeting of the Commissioners of the City of Rehoboth Beach. We're live in City Hall Commissioners Room, second floor. This is budget meeting number 3, and I'd like to call the meeting to order at 9:01 a.m. I'd like to start off with roll call. Commissioner Don Preston.
Here.
Commissioner Tony Sharp.
Here.
Commissioner Ed Chernowski.
Here.
Commissioner Patrick Gossett.
Here.
Commissioner Tim Bennett.
Here.
Commissioner Bunky Markert.
Here.
And Mayor Stan Mills. We have a full complement of the mayor and commissioners and therefore have a quorum and are formally able to conduct business today. I'd also like to recognize Interim City Manager Evan Miller here, who's been doing the work of the city manager, if we had one, to the second year in a row doing the budget. And we want to thank him for doing that. And during the meeting, as appropriate and at your choice, you can introduce your staff members if you like there, because it's taken a lot of staff members to put this together. With that, we'll move right along and remind everybody that I want to thank everybody that's here in person. At appropriate times, we'll call on you to give your input. We'll just ask you for your name and relationship to the city. Also want to thank everybody that's watching virtually. Thank you for that. And a reminder that the budget that we're talking about is embedded in the agenda. Go to the city website, go to the portal, which is the lime green box and link in the center right of the home page. Look for the date of the meeting, click on it, and voila, there you go. You got the support documents appropriate for this meeting. With that, Anna, no correspondence was identified for this budget meeting, and we'll move right along to the next item is discuss disposition of seeking renewal of lease with DNREC for city to manage and maintain state park lands known as Deauville Beach. As you know, we had a couple meetings on the renewal, and ultimately we didn't like some of the proposed renewal information, so I wanted to share with you what status we're at. Of course, as you know by now, most likely, negotiations for renewal of the city leasing the public lands known as Deauville Beach did not gel, and the state is taking back control of the beach area. Please understand, the city would like to have continued in a management role. We are disappointed of the outcome, but it was not to be without imposing significant additional costs on us. The city has managed Deauville Beach, providing lifeguards, parking, concession services, tennis courts, public restrooms, and beach maintenance on behalf of the state for the past 48 years. Management of Deauville Beach has been at a net financial loss for the city of Rehoboth Beach. DNREC's proposed increase of the lease fee from $1 a year to a new cost formula for the city equaling a percentage of annual parking fees estimated to yield DNREC $10,000 to $12,000 additional in fees was disfavored by the Board of Commissioners, as it would have added to our costs, thereby increasing our financial loss in managing and maintaining the state's land. The new lease proposal was unsatisfactory to the commissioners, while the city's counter proposal was unsatisfactory to DNREC, thereby ending negotiations. A plan is in the works between Evan Miller and the DNREC folks to transition management and maintenance of the state-owned public land back to DNREC. Moving forward, the state will manage lifeguards, parking, concession services, and beach maintenance, as well as the tennis courts at Deauville Beach. With its experience managing other state parks in Delaware, DNREC should be able to absorb management of Deauville Beach into its inventory, providing for a smooth transition in management and maintenance roles from the city back to DNREC. Negotiations, as I understand, took almost a year. Thanks go to Interim City Manager Evan Miller and the DNREC team for working in good faith on a renewed lease, but it was not to be. So therefore, we look forward to maintaining a cooperative, continued relationship with DNREC as we both strive to serve our residents and visitors. Evan, did you want to add anything further to it?
I have nothing.
All right. So there's going to be a lot of press coverage. You can get some more information in the press coverage. Is there any questions?
I have one, Mayor. So
Yeah.
just to reiterate, which I think is important, so City Manager had mentioned that we were running Deauville Beach and maintaining it at a loss each year. What was that number again? Do we remember? Was it 25,000 or
I think from the rough numbers that I had done, it was about $30,000.
30,000? So with the additional terms that we couldn't come to agreement with, we would have then put upon the burden of the city and the taxpayer an additional $10,000, $15,000 based on parking. So thank you for negotiating, but I think we probably ended up in the right place for at least the city and the taxpayers. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else?
I guess I have a comment or question. So a lot of people are obviously upset and have reached out. Is there an appropriate place to tell them to reach out to? I mean, I've just been saying if you're unhappy with the decision that DNREC has made what they offered the city in terms of a lease, to contact our representatives, the governor. I don't know what else to tell people, but that's the direction that I've been.
Yeah, no, I think that's appropriate. Our legislators would be Senator Russ Huxtable and Representative Pete Schwarzkopf, and then carbon copy the governor's office and maybe Secretary Garvin's office.
Just wanted that to, I guess, be digested in
Sure.
the public, that's an appropriate place to go if you're unhappy.
Just a further question for City Manager Evans. With regards to this transition plan, what is the process for that, or what do we anticipate a date? I know the news has been reporting that, fees, park entrance fees typically are March 1 to October 31, I guess. Right. And they're sort of hedging that, saying it may not be March 1st, it may be pushed back some or whatever. But any indication that you've had working with DNREC is kind of their plan or
Sure, thank you,
transition
Commissioner.
plan?
Yeah, I expect a meeting with the Division of Parks and Recreation early next week to talk about that transition plan, mainly to discuss the capital improvements that we've made to the site and whether they have any interest in acquiring or retaining any of those capital improvements. There's also obviously some infrastructure underneath Deauville Beach that we need to work out the easement for that, the maintenance of that infrastructure. So early next week, I will have a conversation with them to start talking about that transition plan. We have already started to remove some of our equipment and signage and things like that from Deauville, just preparing for that transition. But unfortunately, I don't have any more information at this time.
And just an issue that I hope is part of that transition plan is communication. I mean, people just realize that that's been part of Rehoboth for as long as many generations can remember. So the changeover with the different parking fee and entrance fees and what have you. So I would hopefully that you, in negotiations for this transition plan, there's appropriate signage and indications that this is a change, and if there are issues that DNREC is responsible and what have you, just like in Cape Henlopen State Park. Again, I know it's kind of unknown territory, but that is one of my prime concerns, is just the communication about the change and new responsibilities, what have you. And also, with some of our code aspects that affect the beach, are those appropriate for DNREC to enforce with regards to sleeping on the beach and fires on the beach and tents on the beach and all those kind of issues that our codes reflect, but not necessarily are reflected with DNREC. Right. So again, just all of those things fit in there, and good luck with that.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Walter, did you want to say something?
Morning, Walter Birmingham, 123 Henlopen Avenue. I was at the last meeting, and I think Evan, I'm sure he negotiated in good faith. And Mr. Mayor, I think your statement was very well done this morning. In the News Journal this morning, there was nothing about it. There's been nothing in the paper about it, and I think it's presumptive to think that most of the people know what's out there. But I would imagine that you got some correspondence. I didn't see it embedded. There was questions about the outfall. The questions running around the community that I've heard, or people call and ask me what's going on, is it the beach? Is it the sidewalk going to the beach? Is it the parking lot or the beach tags, et cetera? I think there needs to be some type of, just like you wrote your, or read your report this morning, something put out official, a copy of what they sent to you and what's on the table, so that they get the truth from the city. And if you take it from those documents, then the people have at least been informed. Lines in the sand only does so much, but there ought to be some type of a press release that goes out so the public knows what you received from DNREC and what was inclusive to it. Thank you.
Thank you, Walter. Anybody else?
I had something. I wanted to say.
Bonky?
I had a number of people contact me, of residents who, I think have a particular, due to us managing it for the last nearly 50 years, an attachment to Deauville Beach and considering it more or less like their beach, and I'm just curious, do we know at this time any accommodations that may be made to residents assuming that they would have a state park pass? Would they be able to use it there? Or do we know anything about that at this time? Or that's all.
We know nothing. It's handed over to the state. That's their rules. They can
Right.
do whatever they want.
Yeah.
I would assume that they're going to operate it like the rest of the state park system.
Right.
And that's all we
Okay.
really know.
So I didn't know. So I just wanted to ask. Okay.
Commissioner Legree, Jay.
Hickory, 7 Prospect Street. We have a major pump station for our force main, I mean, you're aware of that. They're gonna have to let us have access to that. And how far will we rake the beach? How far north? Will we,
Where's the dividing line between Rehoboth Beach and Deauville Beach, Evan?
So that'll be part of, I think, the discussion with the state next week. Taking a look at the Exhibit A, which was in the lease document, I'm assuming that the division between the state property and the Rehoboth boundary would be around Pennsylvania Avenue, just at the bend there on Surf. So
That's almost the entirety of the north end of
Yes.
the board,
Yes.
of the north of the boardwalk there, yeah.
I noticed that Evan had lowered his estimate for income on parking meters by 10,000. Was that because of Deauville, or was that for something else? On last night's update on the budget, you went from 40 to 30. It's not very much. I think that answers my question. We just don't know yet.
Oh, I see.
Thank you. Thanks,
Thank
Evan.
you. Thank you. Anybody else? We'd like to move on to the main purpose of the meeting today, of course, is discuss draft budget for fiscal year 2025, including capital improvement program as presented by Evan Miller, to include but not limited to the following departments. And we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
There's 10.
10 departments there to go over before we start discussing possible additional revenue sources. Evan, I'll turn it over to you.
thank you,
Mayor,
Mayor.
before you both begin, could I get one clarification from our previous discussion on the 5th and one observation? The clarification is the operational budget that we were looking at on our February 5th discussion, as well as today. Would you characterize those budgets as they are wish lists, or would you characterize them that they are a conservative view of what's needed in each department to make them successful in this budget?
Sure, thank you, Commissioner. I would say they're far from wish list
Okay.
budgets. What I have encouraged the staff to do and what I've encourage them to do every year is be practical in terms of what they realistically think that they can achieve within a given fiscal year. I think for the most part, what you'll see are the budgets are relatively consistent with the prior year, aside from the salary and benefit piece.
Right, the actuals.
Correct.
Yes. I just wanted to get very precise. Because I had heard from some folks talking about, well, we need to trim our expectations, and I think it's much more fair to look at what it's actually costing us to run our city and make some judgments based on that.
Sure.
So thank you for that. The other observation, Mayor, is on how we used our time in our previous meeting, and I'm so glad you brought up, we've got 10 departments to go through. And we had 8 last time, and we spent a considerable amount of time with the departments. And I know for myself, I'm anxious to get to revenue increases and expense reductions and have a robust discussion on those. So is there a way that maybe, Evan, you're already shaking your head, that we could hone in on maybe what's really significantly changed in the departments?
Absolutely.
And then have the commissioners ask questions to move us along, because I think everybody's anxious with all the press coverage that has been out there and the real need that we need to solve this.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. That was actually the approach that I was going to take with this meeting. I have identified, a few accounts within each department where we're either seeing a decent increase or it's a large expenditure within that account. So I'll just briefly touch on those. Again, there are several departments we'll go over today, but a majority of them are pretty short and brief. So I will be brief. If you'd like, I can just dive right
please.
in.
Please
Mayor,
start.
Mayor, before you get started, I have just a comment to make, if I could, an observation maybe. First of all, I appreciate Commissioner Sharp's question of Evan about whether these are wish lists or conservative estimates of what's needed. My perception was certainly that they were conservative. And I listened very carefully to the discussion, the last discussion of the budget. And it was sort of ferreted out in that discussion, especially in the public works area. So, Evan, from my perspective, I'd like to commend you on your leadership of putting this all together in a very understandable way and not taking us through thousands of lines of budget that, for me, frankly, is not practical or even that important for us sitting up here. So thank you for that. The second thing is, Mayor, in a very simple way, as I've studied this over the last week, we have 2 things that we have to do today. One is we have to decide on parking meter rates. And 2, we have to start a robust discussion about how to solve the deficit. And frankly, from my perspective, not much else is important. And so I know Evan's going to be brief here, but just for the record, from this commissioner's seat, those 2 things are really our top objective today. So thank you for indulging me.
Thank you.
If I could just tackle onto that, and I will be
So
very
much,
brief.
so much for a
Because
brief meeting.
what I'm about to say would, I think, save us a lot of time, and I find it incredibly frustrating that we got the new budget, I think, emailed to us yesterday, which is fine. I understand that you need time to prepare it, but there's a large amount of changes, and we don't know what the changes are. For instance, I won't get into the details, but I know in the past, we used to at least get a little write-up saying this is what changed from this meeting to this meeting, and the spreadsheets would actually be redlined. So we could look on the spreadsheet, and if it was, I think, in red or green, it was either went up or down, and we could easily identify what those changes were. If we could start doing that in the future, that would be very helpful, at least for me, and I think we could already know what our questions are ahead of time if we knew what the changes were.
Thank you. Evan, let's begin, please.
Sure, and thank you, Commissioner. I will say that actually, yesterday, late afternoon, Bert did prepare a document which summarizes the changes between the two budgets. Obviously, we weren't able to get that into the agenda, nor did I even attempt to get it in the agenda. But I do have it, and I was going to run through the individual changes. There's not, I don't think, as many changes as you would expect, because the few changes that were made were relatively, I guess, high dollar value changes. So first, I just want to say that you'll see on page 1 of the budget document, it would be page 4 of 44 of the PDF document. The deficit now reflects a position of $4,030,724. The changes that are included in this budget from the previous version was, first, we did remove $100,000 in revenue from parking permit sales at Deauville Beach, given the recent announcement.
What was that figure again? I'm sorry.
100,000.
Thank you.
There were also some changes to the paid leave that we will have to start contributing to. That change was to the salary line in the general fund. That equated to less than $10,000. The other changes, the significant changes, were actually in the capital improvement plan. As I had mentioned at the last meeting, we are going through the process of evaluating current capital projects that are under development or underway right now, and evaluating what, if anything, needs to be carried over into the next fiscal year. So with that being said, we did have to include $80,000 for the LED retrofit project. There's been some delays in receiving the arms for the Center Island lights on Rehoboth Avenue. So we expect roughly $80,000 to need to be expended for that project next fiscal year. And then the largest is the State Road Pump Station. They are nearing completion, but it's expected that they will not complete the pump station by the end of the fiscal year. So in talking with our Director of Public Works, Henry, we are including $400,000 in next year's budget for completion of the State Road Pump Station. So that summarizes the changes to the budget that is reflected in this document from the last version that was before you. And in the future, we will update this document, this change document, and make sure that that's available as well.
So Evan, just another clarification from me. On these increases and reductions as well, are we going to have a more in-depth discussion as to whether or not these are good ideas?
Yeah.
These are just, this is first stab at this, right? Thank you.
And Evan, just to clarify, the two CIP projects, the additional of the 80
Yes.
for the LED and the 400 for the State Road Pump Station.
Yes.
These are not additional costs, correct?
Not
You just
additional.
believe they're going to be
Correct.
expended in the next fiscal year rather than this fiscal year.
Correct.
So my expectations toward, after we get through all these departments, then we'll go through the CIP
Sure.
in more detail.
So jumping right in, the first department that we were going to look at was the mayor and commissioners. That is on page 9 of 44, if you're looking at the PDF, or
Am
page
I looking at
6.
the page number at the bottom of each page here?
Yes. Yeah, so that would be page 6.
This is page 2,
Yep.
correct?
Just one page of difference because of the index, so.
Page 9?
6.
Page what?
6.
Page 6, which is 9 of the PDF.
Well, then, I must have I loaded it today, and I'm showing that page 6 is 7 of 41. So let's, for consistency, give me a page number at the bottom, I guess.
So on page 6 is the mayor and commissioners. Again, for sake of brevity, our largest account in the mayor and commissioners budget is the legal services. We are budgeting $250,000, which is a decrease of $50,000 from last year's budget.
And Evan, through, I think last year 300, but through the end of July or January, our legal expenses have only been 104?
Correct.
That's actually updated as of yesterday.
Okay.
104 should be a current number. I went through the, I updated the actuals yesterday, 2024 actuals, so they should be,
So
we're in pretty good shape on that.
we're being very conservative with, or I guess we're being generous with the 250 for next year.
Well, I think we need at some point a full summary of all our legal expenses, because since we've retained Luke for the planning commission, the total legal expenses have, from my view, skyrocketed. And, you know, we're paying high dollar for all our attorneys now. And, we need to be cognizant of that.
Sure. I am prepared if you'd like to run through the current attorney rates if you'd like, but I agree. I think 250, we are being a little aggressive. Now, you know, if you look back to 2023's actual numbers, we were over 250,000. So I think to play it safe, we wanted to budget 250, but we can certainly take a look at that.
So the 104,000, is that the correct actual or not?
That's correct, actually.
That is correct. Okay, thank you.
As of yesterday.
Thank you.
Evan, the other line, other professional services, 2023 was quite high, and we're showing a negative 24. So you feel comfortable with that 5,000 in that regards, or I don't understand what's included in that category?
Yeah, other professional services, I'll have to take a look. The only thing I could think of off the top of my head would be maybe Wallace Montgomery Services for comprehensive development plan, but we do have a separate account for that. So I'd have to go back, but it does look like it was a bit abnormal in 2023.
Thank you.
That's all I had on mayor and commissioners.
The only thing I'll say is I noticed that of all of the salaries, we're the only ones that aren't getting an increase.
About,
I'm on a fixed
What do you
income.
want to do about that?
there was a summary of all the legal fees in one of the budget documents. It wasn't last month, but I think maybe the month before. But we'll prepare a new, more updated one. But the one we have right now that was in your agenda a couple of months ago was
Budget
compilation.
meeting number 1, I think, might have included that.
And are you, the monthly budget report?
I'm talking about the monthly budget report.
Oh.
It's in the agenda. It was about, I think maybe it was in December's summary. But we'll prepare a more updated one. But we compiled every legal expense for every department, included it in the report.
What page you want to go to?
Sure. Next would be the finance department. And that is on, I believe, the same page. So finance department, I think I had mentioned in the last meeting, new this year, we have broken finance out from administration. So largely what you'll see there is just salaries and then medical insurance and other benefits. We did break out a little office supplies too, but between admin and finance, we all share office supplies.
And Evan, that's how many employees?
That would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, I believe. 6. Mm-hmm. Next is administration. That would be on page 6 through 8. In the part-time salaries line, we did include 15,000 that would be available for an intern for the summer. Collection fees, 25,000. I just wanted to address that. That's merchant fees for processing at the credit card terminals. Here in the city, that's account 510-100. CDP professional services, that's account 510-900. That is probably should be reclassified or the money moved into the contractual services or other professional services line. That is for Wallace Montgomery, their work related to neighborhood design template, and we've also had some discussion about mixed use code. So that would be for those professional services. Contractual services is account 511-400. That's for Delmarva Temp and our document management system. Delmarva Temp is a temporary staffing agency that we use in the event that we're unsuccessful in recruiting for part-time positions. Other professional services, $250,000, that's account 511-500. That is for the continuation of our ADA transition plan, any recommendations out of the parking and traffic study, the appraisal services, the wireless communication facility application review, and some continuation for strategic solutions process mapping.
And we think all of that is going to cost significantly less than it did in
Yes.
2024.
The other thing is, I think previously we had included our Munis annual fee in other professional services, and that has been accounted for in the IT department, so that was removed. Finally, the maintenance contracts account, $155,000. That's account 52700. That is our new heart-to-beat AED maintenance. So we have added AEDs throughout all of our city facilities. We've now purchased those, and it's a maintenance program to ensure that all the pads and everything are up to date and don't expire. That also includes ServPro cleaning services and a postage machine lease, and then any miscellaneous floor cleaning. And then finally, we do have $250,000 in contingency. That is monies that isn't really dedicated for any purpose. It's sort of just the rainy day fund, I guess, if you will. So, and certainly as we proceed with the budget, we can take a look at that number too, but we did bring that down from prior years. That's all I have on administration.
Evan, this one blows my mind a little bit. Postage is going up to $55,000 in a day and age where we should be doing almost everything electronically.
Yeah, and postage fees are going up as well.
And if you could remind us, Evan, the car allowance is going up. I believe the previous city manager decided that another individual needed
Correct.
an allowance to be competitive, correct?
Yes.
And we agreed to that. That's all I have, thank you.
And I'll just articulate too, for administration, those individuals are the city manager, the assistant city manager, the executive assistant to the city manager, city secretary, and human resource payroll administrator. Next, we can move into Alderman. I really didn't have anything specific in Alderman Court. That is, Alderman is on page 8 of the document. We do obviously have our Alderman judge, and then we have an Alderman court clerk, and that position is reflected in the part-time salaries account, 501-700. Next would be the IT department. This is page 9 of the document. Server infrastructure, you see we have $30,000. Max has started negotiations with Microsoft about adding additional licensing module for on-premise stuff. Really, this allows us to have a little bit of flexibility in the products that we're using for our staff. So in some cases, and Max can correct me if I'm wrong, but in some cases when we have employees that don't need access to the full Microsoft suite, it's giving them access to individual products. So he has started negotiations with that, but we expect that to increase. Software and licenses, that's account 506, 560, 30,000. This is for increased cybersecurity efforts. Essentially, in order to be eligible for cybersecurity initiatives being offered through the state's IT division, we have to show expenditures in our budget. So DTI is the state agency. They would take a services order, but they won't distribute grant funds based on those orders. So again, we have to account for some of those expenses related to those cybersecurity efforts. Telephone, that's $100,000 in account 512000. This may need to be retitled to communications, but this is really the telephone services, mobile data services, Comcast consumer cable, and business fiber services. Cell phones, the account just under that, 512500. This is anything that we have connected to our network. So that includes cell phones, tablets, Cradle Points, et cetera.
Evan, do most employees, I think, get a city-owned cell phone, correct?
I don't know that most do. Usually I think our sort of executive level team, like department heads, do. We do have, I think, a few departments that use like a shared phone if it's on-call services. But I think for the most part, it's just department heads that receive cell phones.
And we don't do a cell phone allowance for other employees that may use their cell phone on their personal cell phones?
Correct.
For
We do not offer
related?
that, no. Maintenance contracts, 52700. This, as I mentioned before, includes taking over the Tyler, the Munis annual fee, as well as a PACE program, Tyler PACE program. The PACE program is essentially a training program where we can reach out to Tyler Technologies and request training on several modules within Munis. There's a lot more included in there that I can go into, but it's anything from door access controls, hardware support, GPS receivers, any geolocating assets. There's a lot really included in that account.
Along those lines, Evan, if I may, the new Beach Patrol building, does that have any additional cameras or security, or is that an additional expense in that area? And that would that be here or elsewhere?
Sure, it does. Max, do you want to touch on that? I know there are additional security cameras that are included as part of that building, as well as a dedicated equipment room also. So
That's correct. The Beach Patrol will have door access controls. It'd be fully managed, much like this building is, and it will be tied into that same system. So video cameras, et cetera. So what was the other part of your question?
That's an additional expense, and it's included in this area, or is that under Beach Patrol expenses, or how would that be figured?
So my understanding is that that will be part of the project cost, but we will pick up the maintenance after it is installed, and that will go in that line item. But that is not covered right now, obviously.
Okay, thank you.
Max, do we have an ongoing effort to increase our security camera coverage? Is that something we look at every year and looking at expanding it? Let's see more of Rehoboth Beach,
Absolutely.
more of the boardwalk?
Absolutely. So, we've run the pilot project at the boardwalk. We're kind of in a hold there, until Beach Patrol gets done. We certainly need to run fiber, make it more of a physical infrastructure down there rather than being wireless. We've kind of maxed out that capacity. But in the interim, we have obviously built the complex here. We've expanded our camera systems out to our streets yard, our wastewater facility. Next on the list would be our Lynch water facility. So anywhere we've got a facility, I'd like to tie that into our door access controls and our video surveillance systems.
Thank you.
Well, I'll interject it here. I was going to wait for the capital improvement program discussion, but since you brought up cameras and everything, one of my desires as I've talked with Evan about, is I would like to see multi-year programs, not all implemented all at once perhaps, but focusing on security specifically. And for me, that involves two things. One, more video cameras along the boardwalk. I think the way the country's headed, we need to start now for planning, because the boardwalk committee proposed additional cameras 5, 6 years ago, 7 years ago. We haven't made any progress yet, so I'd like to see progress in that respect, but also bollards for safety. You know, these things that come out of the ground near the bandstand area, maybe at the beach patrol area. And so again, those are things that they're my wish list, but to me, they're necessities. They're not truly wish list things. They serve a purpose and could save lives. Anyhow, that's.
Thank you, Mayor. That has been at least, I have only just mentioned it to Max at this point, and also in talking with the chief, it is something that I think we're going to consider as a long-term plan for our security, especially related to cameras. I know the police department has an interest in wanting to have cameras down around the bandstand, as well as possibly on Rehoboth Avenue too. So getting a long-term plan together is something that we would like to do.
With regard to cameras, is it our protocol to set, I know, police body cameras holding that footage or recording for a certain period of time? Is that or directed by the state, or is that our own internal protocols, or?
Specifically the body cameras? Or
Specifically body camera, but then how does that relate to the rest of our footage that we capture?
I believe we're not bound by a retention rate by the state for our video system. Certainly, I would let the chief speak to what the body cam, that goes into a separate system completely from us, so we have no management of that.
So do we have any protocol on length of maintaining that data on our cameras, or?
I would say that currently we have about 2 weeks of active. We might have another week to 2 in archive before it is overwritten. You know, we're trying to thread the fine line of making sure that we, you know, cover and have, you know, adequate time to react to issues that may arise that may need the videotape, but not hold on to it so long that it becomes an impediment to business because of all of the FOIA requests that we may get from it.
But we really don't have any written protocols on that at this time.
Not currently at this time.
Thank you.
You want to say something?
Good morning, Chief Banks. Commissioner, as far as the body-worn cameras, we have our service here that goes into the state program that maintains any evidence. Body camera film is evidence of anything, and if there's an active court case or not, anytime it goes on. So there's backups, redundancy through the state and all that. And 2 is if there is a court date, and 2, it goes all the way through. It can't be deleted or anything like that. So right now, just in-house and things that we're looking at, we're probably over almost to a year that we're keeping these things here, but the state's keeping it a lot longer with the redundancy and stuff. So they're actually working on a statewide policy now, the state chiefs and the Attorney General's office and all, what will the protocol be, because it's going to get into what can be released and how, under what circumstances and all. So the state and Secretary of Homeland Security is working on that combined right now. So more to come, I guess. But right now, every department's kind of different, but with the retention period, with the backups is through the state.
Thank you.
Chief? Anything else?
Yeah, just the last thing was the capital improvements. I think they're the only department that has capital improvements for today. We do have $90,000 in the capital budget. That is for the continuation of our computer lifecycle replacements. Again, we try to replace our computer infrastructure, 1/3 of it every single year. Radio replacements, copier replacements, and then update to the fuel management system. Max, I don't know if you have anything to add on capital.
Not really very much, other than, you know, we're adding more devices every year as we add people, and certainly as we move into providing devices to our frontline workers. Imagine the meter readers and the people who are out in your yard fixing devices, being able to complete work orders before they come back to the office. So basically short-circuiting the round trip back to the office to complete the work. Hopefully we can get work completed prior to it, before they even leave the job site. So, but we are trying to keep that flat. We recognize the situation. We can push that a little ways because we have kept up on our regular cycle of maintenance or turnover. So just trying to help out every way we can.
Thank you.
If there's nothing else on IT, we can go into building and licensing. That is on page 10. This budget reflects a fully staffed building and licensing department. We have hired a code enforcement officer, a second code enforcement officer. So the salaries and benefits reflect full complement of the building and licensing department. Legal services account 510000, again, $70,000. Our actual is very comparable to that. We do include $10,000 for engineering. Engineering services we mainly use should we need to use a outside engineer to assist with any plan reviews for some of the major site plan reviews coming through. Other professional services, $55,000. This is for Wallace Montgomery, their assistance as our planner for plan reviews. And that is really it, all I had for building and licensing.
Evan, I know I've expressed in the past my desire for the city to have a code enforcement person that operates more effectively on Saturdays, Sundays, holidays, overnight, or into the night. When you mentioned that we have a new code officer, is that Scott or is that beyond?
No, this is a second code enforcement officer. I'm blanking on her name right now.
Amanda Palmer.
Amanda, thank you.
And is that specifically to address weekends and
Yeah, so
nights
I
and
know both
Sundays?
in the interviews that we did with Scott and with Amanda, we expressed again our interest in having holidays, weekends, evenings, things like that. So now that Amanda's on board, Mary Ellen will be working with the code enforcement officers to get some type of schedule.
I think
together,
besides me, other commissioners over the years have expressed an interest in that, so it's
Yep.
very important. Thank you.
I have a question. When you look at the CDP, probably 8 of the top 10 issues are all around code in terms of our zoning codes are getting less ambiguous language written. So there's been numbers of discussions over the years about rewriting our code or updating it, which some people have said could be $300,000–$400,000. Would that be reflected in here, or is that something we haven't considered?
So it's not reflected in here, but I think one important thing to note is, again, back when we were developing the comprehensive development plan, the most recent update to the comp plan, there were a number of zoning code related areas that we needed to address. I have since provided that document to Mary Ellen. I know that she is discussing with Wallace Montgomery. I believe Lauren Good with Wallace Montgomery also had worked with KCI before Wallace Montgomery, and KCI was the group that started the comprehensive development plan. So we are aware of, I think it's 22 zoning code related items that need to be addressed. So we're gonna work through that with Wallace Montgomery. The other thing, obviously, that's going on right now is Chapter 236, site plan review, which the Planning Commission has done their review and have their recommendation. The staff had done some work leading up to the Planning Commission's work as well. So a lot of that effort is ongoing, and right now I think it's mainly been reflected through the staff time, staff salaries, as well as the consulting arrangement that we have with Wallace Montgomery. So,
But would we consider a full rewrite and need to budget for that, or do you don't feel it's necessary?
I think at this time it'd be hard for me to say whether a full rewrite is necessary. I think I'd have to talk a little bit more with Mary Ellen about that.
Okay.
Evan, didn't we already have some expenditures going into sort of a code overview and identifying
Correct.
duplicates,
Correct.
missing language, inconsistencies?
Yes, and that effort's still ongoing as well. I think what you might be referring to is we had the legal and editorial analysis done by the code company. I have actually since asked them to provide me with a document that summarizes all of those proposed changes. My concern with that effort was that it didn't address the entirety of the code or the entirety of a particular chapter. Mainly the questions they were asking was, does this fee need to be updated? Is this job title still relevant? Is this reference to state code still applicable? I think there's a lot more that goes into a review of a city code than just answering some of those questions. So I'm hoping to get that document from the code company that we can use to help inform our project of going through each chapter of the code and reviewing it to make sure that we do a more thorough analysis.
What
of it.
company was that?
That was General Code. Same company that manages our online code.
Okay.
Was the one who did the
'Cause my
legal and editorial.
recollection was it wasn't inexpensive to go through that effort.
No.
And I thought that would be coming before us at some point and would sort of bring together this overarching thought of, hey, the code needs to be completely rewritten in these areas. So keep us up to date.
Yeah,
on that.
I absolutely will.
Evan, also in building and licensing, I know we've been going through a mapping process, if we will, to establish or reestablish processes and protocol. Are any of those expenses reflected in this or continuing?
Yeah, so we have, I think a majority of those expenses have already been expended this current fiscal year. I think we're heading into like phase 3 now. So I have accounted for some of that expenses in the administration department only because we've done a lot of work with the building and licensing aspect. And so now we are turning towards boards and commissions. So a lot of the stuff that Ann works on. So because some of that is still within the realm of building and licensing, but also it falls within admin. And as I mentioned before, city secretary is within admin. I've accounted for some of that expense in the admin budget. But yes, that effort's still ongoing.
Are some of those things has to do with the capabilities in Munis and the tech support from Tyler?
Right. Correct. Yeah, Mary Ellen, we've been working together with Strategic Solutions to really give us a framework, something that we can use to sort of present to Tyler for them to be able to help us scope this project, this implementation project. We've also started meeting with some other jurisdictions that currently use Munis for permitting and licensing. So this effort's ongoing.
Mayor, this may be for you. So because I know in terms of, again, our CDP priorities of this cleaning up of the code, do we need to add additional dollars in here to do that? Or is that not something on your agenda, on your agenda based upon the priorities we identified in January?
Well, I'm afraid I've got to defer to Evan because we have discussed this on and off, unfortunately, discussed on and off for the past 2 years. So it's time to
Because I think we all agree it needs to be done, and if it needs to be done, we need to add whatever we think the estimate would be, whether it's 200,000 or 400,000, whatever that is, unless we just decide we don't want to do that. But
I think we all agreed it was the highest priority. And,
Right.
And that alone drives much of the legal costs that we encounter.
Right.
We did have this discussion. I remember distinctly with the former city manager. And I remember distinctly him saying that the place where we should start is building and licensing, and it should be a top to bottom rewrite. Is that your recollection?
Yep.
Yeah.
I think in particular that also dealt with Chapter 236, which that project was completed and was done, and then it was turned over to the Planning Commission. So I think a lot of what we're talking about today is under development to an extent, just maybe not the extent that you might hope. But I will say there are funds in the budget to continue these efforts. There's a lot of moving pieces back to the legal and editorial analysis. We have started to review our codes. We recently completed the tree code. We're in the process of doing the personnel code. We're in the process of doing Chapter 236. So there's a lot of moving parts to this as well. But I think we do need to come back together and figure out where the priorities are in the code to start looking at and doing a review and rewrite.
But just to be clear, it's not one entity that's looking at the entirety. They're looking at
Correct.
individual
Not one
pieces.
entity.
Okay.
So Evan, can you make sure I'm looking at this correctly? I'm looking at the bottom line on building and licensing. And I'm looking at the 2024 actual total and the 25 preliminary. And that differential is about 300,000-ish, right? So how do you characterize what the taxpayer's getting for $300,000?
Sure.
And I have the same question as I looked at the bottom line for IT. Because I'm looking at about a $500,000 differential ish. And I'm trying to figure out what's the story behind that. I get all the line items and this and that and projects and blah, blah, blah. But I'm a bottom line kind of person. So between the two of them, I'm looking at about 800,000, trying to figure out what's our story here.
Thank you, Commissioner. So certainly I would say the two departments are very different in terms of what those additional expenses are. The Building and Licensing Department, I think it largely reflects salaries. We obviously have 2 new positions within Building and Licensing. We've got a second code enforcement officer, which I don't think we had a full current fiscal year of 2 code enforcement officers. And then we also have Planning and Community Development Director, which is a new position as well. So I think largely the increases, the expenses related to building and licensing are the personnel pieces. The IT department, it's the opposite. It's the software, it's the services, it's the products.
And that's
that have
exactly
gone up.
what I wanted you to say, because I'm looking for how we are course correcting to be properly resourced. And I know I keep using that term, and actually I'm seeing it right here. I'm finally seeing it bubble up in the dollars, that here's what the taxpayer's going to get. And if it's corrections to our resources that in turn will give stronger, better enforcement, that's a win for our constituents, I think, if I'm watching these numbers correctly and where our investments need to be. Okay, thank you.
If there's nothing further on building and licensing, the next department is parking meter. And that
Page 19.
starts on page 19. Yes, thank you, Mayor.
Wait a minute.
Did we skip over communications?
Communications will be at budget meeting.
I see,
4, is it?
sorry,
Yes.
yep,
Yep.
I'm not following the.
I'm going to turn it over to Gene here in a minute to talk to part-time salaries, but parking meter is where we include, obviously, our parking supervisor, our assistant parking supervisor, and then the part-time salaries related to office clerks, meter enforcement. So Gene has some of the figures in terms of the personnel staffing.
For the parking meter department, this figure is for 27 employees, which includes our office, our enforcement, and our data entry clerks. And then we also have another additional 4 employees that are in the parking permit, that are the ones out on the street selling the permits. And it also includes, like our other seasonals, a $500 bonus for the seasonals at the end of the season is included in this as well.
Are those bonuses reflected, or potential bonuses reflected in each department, or?
Yeah,
are they
so that's
actual-
part of the part-time salaries. It comes out of that line item.
And Gina, it looks like we might be going down 1 full-time person in parking, is that correct? It looks like the salary is going down, the full-time salary.
So I believe last year, a few of our part-time salaries got included in our full-time salaries. That's why the actual is higher.
Okay,
The new 25 one is 2 full-time.
okay, thank you.
Oh, wait, I'm sorry, excuse me, there is one difference. Bill Maffei moved from parking to streets as well.
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you for that.
That's what it was.
Yep.
I-
That explains it.
from parking to streets?
Yeah, so he's our meter tech, so he now is in the streets department. And also his part-time employees are in the streets department as well too. So he has some seasonals as well that are
We don't have a sign department anymore.
We do, it's just under the streets department instead of parking department.
Probably our largest expenditures from the parking department are accounts 512-200 pay by phone processing fee and account 514-200 parking credit card fees. So those are the fees that we incur for using the third party pay by phone vendor, as well as the credit card transaction fees that we receive. You will see that we do include account 508-500 as spare parts for parking meters. So again, we always try to make sure that we have adequate spare parts inventory, only so that if a meter goes down, we have those parts in stock and they're ready to be replaced to keep that meter in service. And finally, maintenance contracts. That's probably our other largest account. That is account 520-700. This is really any contract that we have for software and support or any parking related infrastructure. So we have parking meters, we have our whole software program that we utilize to keep track of citations, customer information, photos, and then we also have 2 license plate readers vehicles. So 2 vehicles with LPR equipment on the vehicle, in the vehicle. So this really captures the maintenance contracts associated with all of that related software and equipment.
Evan, I may have I know you said one of the big differences is the pay by phone processing fee.
Yes.
But could you just say why again?
Sure. So pay by phone processing fee is the fee that we incur from using Park Mobile. Park Mobile is the sort of merchant of record, if you will. So there are fees that we incur through using Park Mobile. What you'll see is actually for 2024 actual, the number was $325,000, but we weren't appropriately breaking out the fees between the Park Mobile fee account and the pay by phone processing fee. So
I see that you've done that.
those 2 were broken out. You are very fortunate in that we're also in an agreement with Park Mobile, in addition to several other coastal towns, where we do get a small percentage of the revenue that Park Mobile receives from all the coastal towns. I think it's small, but we do receive a little bit of revenue share from that as well.
And so the bottom line for parking meter is it's almost flat. Okay, just checking in to make sure I'm not sitting over here not grasping it. Thank you.
Evan, if I may, back up 506-500, minor equipment and supplies, actuals versus preliminary, quite a wide spread there. Is that a
Yes,
specific
thank you
purchase?
for bringing it up. So that goes back to our technical services division. So minor equipment and supplies was an account used for bill and tech services. So that figure has been moved to the streets department.
So it's not a savings, it's
Just a
transfer. if you will.
transfer, yeah,
Okay.
reallocation. If there's nothing further on parking meter, we can move into parks, which is on page 20. Parks is where we include the salaries for our city arborist, as well as there is a part-time park assistant that we utilize as well. You'll see that the medical insurance has gone up pretty significantly. That is just us planning for a new arborist should they want full family medical insurance coverage. So just making sure that we appropriately budget for that. They may not take full family medical, but we needed to make sure that the expense was there just in case. Contractual services, account 511-400. This is for any work related to ongoing Sposato landscaping and irrigation in the city. So contracts that we have to manage those landscaped and irrigation areas.
Evan, how often do we bid those services out?
I don't know. I would have to ask Liz when it was last bid out. I think we also went through an effort last fiscal year to begin developing an RFP for landscape services. So off the top of my head, I do not know.
And what's this, refresh our memory on the status of new arborist?
Go ahead.
So we had a potential, and we gave him an offer, and he didn't take it. He actually just didn't ever talk to us again. So we have 2 new applicants since then, and we have a virtual interview scheduled for, I believe it's the 28th. So we have another potential candidate.
All right, thank you.
Let's see. Maintenance contracts, account 52700. This is for portable toilets. Now, we did include, Deauville Beach was a location that we had portable toilets, so we will see a reduction or a decrease this year in that expense. Trees, pruning, and landscape, as well as tree preservation, both of those accounts are related to annual tree pruning and any tree maintenance or cleanup that we need to contract out. The tree pruning and landscaping also includes any landscaping projects that we have, new projects that we have in the city. And then finally, auto lease, we are planning for a replacement truck for the part-time sort of groundskeeper. That truck is used very often and is old. So we have increased the auto lease account for that replacement. If there are no further questions, we can go into recreation and tennis on page 22.
One quick question, I'm sorry, on the fireworks.
Yes.
The contract, is that a 3-year contract?
Yes, it is, and I believe we're in the second year now.
Second year?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Recreation and tennis, again, page 22. We do have a part-time recreation employee, largely works on, again, landscaping, groundkeeping, but then also installs volleyball nets. Under minor equipment and supplies, we have miscellaneous supplies related to recreation. So this includes, we purchased a power washer last year, and then any paint needed for any facility located in a park. Contractual services is where we capture any expenses related to our summer recreation programs. So we have a summer walking and jogging group, arts and crafts activities twice a week, face painting, storytime yoga, and magic shows.
And are all those programs, is there any charge for those? Are they free?
I believe they're all free.
They're all free?
Yeah.
And do we have any data, if you will? Are those just anybody can show up? Are they targeted for residents of Rehoboth or visitors, or just curious if it's kind of free babysitting for some people?
Yeah, I'll have to check, but I believe it's open to everyone.
Open to everyone.
And then finally, we have the parking permit department. That's on page 23. Parking permits, this is where we have the part-time salaries for anybody who sells parking permits for us during the summer season. We also include $8,000 in the informational map account 509-300. That's for our parking walking guide. And then obviously the biggest expense is the actual purchasing of the parking permits themselves.
With the potential change with Deauville now, are we looking again at virtual parking permit system? I know that Deauville was one of the challenges, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, so when, thank you, Commissioner. When we were discussing changing the Deauville Beach parking permit program down there, that was before the discussion on metering the lot. We did give some thought as to, implementing a virtual permit system down there. Obviously, that will not be the case now, but it is something that we have in the 5-year CIP. It is something that we want to implement. I think What we largely need to do is the staff needs to get their heads together and present the mayor and commissioners with sort of a recommendation on the code change that really should take place to make it an efficient and effective program. My thought is that sort of our first venture into a virtual parking permit program would be to offer it to the property owners, the residents first, to purchase them virtually, and then slowly bring in the visitor parking permits. We do have, some operational challenges that we need to get over those hurdles first. I mean, certainly one is the code. The other would be, some of the driveway locations on the north side of town. It's very difficult to identify what area is a driveway, so enforcing with a virtual permit would be a little bit more difficult, only because right now we allow anybody to park within a driveway space. So just some operational hurdles we'll have to get through, but it is something that we're considering and sort of the best way to phase implementation of that.
So is that something that we should be looking at as an incremental plan, perhaps over the next 3 to 5 years, with the first year looking at code, second year looking at testing the waters with residents?
Correct.
So, and again, looking at that holistically, I don't know if that's covered with the parking study that we've completed that we'll be hearing from soon, but looking at that parking increases of hourly, so that we have a, if you will, a 3 to 5 year plan of how this implementation will take place, so we can realize the revenue derived from it, the potential savings, and then the costs, so that we have a hard plan moving forward. And I would just support, hopefully all others up here would look at that over a 3 to 5 year plan, because we can't just swallow it whole in the very beginning. But to have that in place, something that we can work towards, not only with regards to income, savings, and expenses. Is that something that you feel that we could see in the next 180 days? Okay, thank you.
Evan, I don't know where it's appropriate, but I'm only asking because I think I see the informational map on one of the parking departments. I know quite some time ago, the Homeowners Association spent a lot of time and effort and money in creating a bicycle safety brochure, and they present it to the Streets and Transportation Committee to ask the city to take over putting their seal on it and taking over printing it out. And I think at the time, the current city manager, which is 2 city managers ago now, agreed. And then I think this last year was not printed. Will that be done? Is that budgeted at all?
So from what I recall, I think when the staff took a look at it, we had some concerns over incorporating some of that information in the parking walking guide. I think it was largely about bikes and being bicycle friendly. I do know, though, that the police department, I believe, uses them pretty heavily. So from what I recall, the cost that the Homeowners Association had for printing those brochures was very minimal. So at the time when I had discussed it with them, I was considering just having the city pay for the cost of the brochure if they would continue to update it and continue to use their vendor. So again, I think it's a beneficial pamphlet information to have for the police department. I don't know that it incorporates well with our parking walking guide, but I'd be supportive of continuing that effort and possibly having the city at least pay for that brochure if the commissioners find it a beneficial product.
Yeah, I think all of the bike shops have appreciated it, found it very informative. I think the police department has indicated that they find it very informative. So I would just like to make sure that it continues to get produced. And I don't believe that the Homeowners Association should continue to bear that cost if we're utilizing it so much. Thank you.
That's all I have.
All right. You want to go, should we go through the CIP?
If I may just comment, earlier discussion about, some comment about a wish list, if you will, from the department heads. But as I understand it, that the majority, as looking at these, the majority of increases have come with regards to salaries, health costs, et cetera, and also some of the computer tools and software that we use. That's a lot of expenses. And just to remind me, though, I believe in all of your department head meetings, when you were going through each individual budget department, that our HR manager and IT director were in those meetings. Correct. So that those costs were really taken a hard look at and hard questions asked about the staffing, the hours involved, and the equipment needed for those. So it's not a wish list that, I need another laptop and 2 more tablets and what have you, that there were those individuals that were responsible for those budgets also in those specific meetings. Correct. So that the real discussion or the wish list as referred to, which we know is not a wish list, those are really done by the department heads themselves, and the HR cost and the computer cost, IT cost, were really overseen by those departments. Right. Thank you.
Largely, I would say where we see sort of the wish list items, so to speak, are in the CIP. And as you'll see, the CIP is relatively flat for the upcoming year. Actually, before this budget meeting, it was lower. But again, because we do have some projects that are ongoing into the next fiscal year, there is some carryover there.
And I think you briefly mentioned it before, but about paid leave tax, is that something that is new to us, or is that something that we have, what about it, I guess?
So that's the Delaware State's new Paid Leave Act. So in January of 2025, we have to start contributing to it, and that'll be a combination of the city paying some of it and the employees paying some of it. And then in 2026, they can start using it, but we have to start contributing in 2025. So it's a very small amount this year because it's only January through March of 2025. Next year, that will be a much higher amount.
Can you guys reference what page and line item that is? I think you said it was just under 10 grand that was put into the budget.
Yeah, I think it's scattered.
It's in each
throughout
department.
all.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is it in
But again, that's another
It
increase
should
that will
have
be
its own
coming.
line item in each department.
Yeah, it does.
Oh, I missed it.
Oh,
Thank
yes.
you.
But that will be much greater. Any guesstimate in a sense, it's about, you said 8,000 or 10,000 now, but next year,
So it will be, so we haven't come to a final decision how much the city's paying and how much the employees are paying.
Okay.
But the total amount is 0.8% of salaries. So our total salary, if the city picks it all up, it would be 0.8% of our salaries. And the most we can have an employee pay is 0.4%. So there's going to be some more conversation about this and what that number actually
So
comes out
that
to.
1 quarter that you're budgeting just under 10 grand is,
That's actually the city picking it up, all of it.
Okay.
Because we haven't decided how we're doing it. And since it's only 10 grand, the difference wouldn't be that big.
so worst case scenario, in 2026, it would be 4 times that amount, so just under 40,000.
Yeah. I don't know the number off the top of my head.
Well, if it's just under 10 for a quarter.
For a
and
quarter,
then
yeah.
That's times 4 is how you get to the annual amount.
Well, but it's based on salary.
Yeah, so if
yeah,
salaries
the
increase,
salary isn't necessarily
it-
going to be flat, so. But it's basically, you're allocating it over the course of the year. There's not like a fluctuate, well, there would be, I guess, are part-time people earning leave or well, or how does that work?
Seasonals would not, they would never get enough hours to do it. But
Okay.
the way the law is written, some of our part-time will have
Okay,
to contribute
but
for them, and
it's-
some we
may-
won't.
May not be
So
significant. But I'm only thinking in terms of, is it pretty flat over the course of the year? Or
Yes.
would it jump up as a result of more people being hired during the
it
season?
won't have
So
anything to do with seasonals, so it'll be pretty flat throughout the
Pretty
year.
flat, okay, that's all.
Could I just ask 2, I think, process questions? Evan, you have a comment column with letters. Is there a key for that at all, or is that your just internal?
It's just internal.
It's just internal.
That's a totaling thing I use.
I mean, based
Total
on the
the
letter, I might be
categories.
able to figure it out.
I was supposed to hide it, and I didn't get it hidden.
Don't ask.
And then will we be going over the general fund revenue individually at some point? Or if we have questions about that, is today the appropriate time?
Yeah, today's it.
Okay.
We could do that today.
So, bottom line, for me, out of these 10 departments, I was trying to roughly figure out those that have additions to their budget and then those that have some decreases. And I come out with we're adding about $575,000 to the budget. And rightfully explained already as to where the big chunks of money are. But I'm going to go back to our previous meeting and try to expand my thinking that exactly how much are we adding from the previous 8 departments that we looked at. It's just, for me, it's just the way I
You
think.
mean from the last meeting to
Yes.
today's meeting?
Yeah, I mean, we already
we
did
added-
8.
We added 762,965.
760 roughly.
762.
760 roughly is what we added from those 8 departments. Thank you.
$750,000 about.
Well, no, I was looking at the budget in the entire budget, not just the departments we looked at today. And like Evan said, most of that was CIP. I understand what you're asking.
Okay, okay.
We're talking about two different
I
things.
think so.
Could you clarify, please, then, for the public?
I was looking at the difference, if we look at on page number 1, the deficit, which is the amount of money we're spending in the budget, was 662,965, greater than it was at the last meeting. Because we had input some potential revenue additions, so Evan added those. And then we had an additional $100,000 from Deauville parking that was also spent elsewhere for a total of 762,965. I believe what Commissioner Sharp was looking at was year over year, the difference for those 8 departments we looked at.
So Evan, do you want to go over the balance of the capital improvements? I don't think we finished them last time. But what I'd like to identify is in our agenda embedded is the entire program. The last 3 pages are the capital budget. They're identified as meeting number 2 because appears to be the same exact CIP as during meeting 2, correct?
No.
There are changes?
Well, Bert didn't change the heading to say
Okay,
meeting
so
3.
we want to change this to meeting number 3 to identify that it is different than the previous one.
There were some
That's all I wanted to do, okay.
So I think the header was not changed. The numbers were,
That's
but the header
exactly
was
right.
not.
Exactly right.
And that
Because
was
there were changes.
Okay, that's the point there.
State Road Pump Station and the LEDs, were those the only 2 reflective?
Correct. I know we had gone through the building and grounds, comfort stations, streets, wastewater, and water capital improvements at our last meeting. This meeting, I indicated that the only department that we had talked about today that has capital improvements would be the IT department. Again, the computer lifecycle replacements, the radio replacements, copier replacements, and the fuel management system. The police department does have a Polaris UTV replacement, but we will talk about the police department at our next budget meeting. And that should be it.
Well, before we move on then, are there any members of the public have any questions, comments on anything? All righty. We'll move on then, Evan, if we're comfortable. The next item of business is discuss possible changes to revenue sources, including but not limited to meter and permit parking fees, gross receipt rental tax, property tax, and wastewater rates. If you recall at the previous meeting when we were talking about changing parking fees, I determined that what did we want to put in the agenda? And I think we said we would put 375 in there. And Evan and I decided then when we were creating the agenda to leave it off so that we had more flexibility, especially after hearing and getting the bigger picture on everything. So you'll notice that in the agenda now and in the afternoon agenda, there are no mention of specific rates. It's just too hard, and we wanted to give more flexibility. By example, parking fees, parking meter fees, at one point or another, we've talked about a 25-cent increase, 50-cent increase, 75-cent increase, increase to $4 and $5. So be up in the air. Evan, if you would first start off by explaining any other possible future revenue sources that could be considered this year, that could be considered this year and that would have to be considered next year or future years, considering time constraints.
Sure.
There's certain things, by example, if we don't get the parking done this year, today's meeting, then we're out for another year. But do you have any other than these four that we're going to be talking about in a minute, can you offer any other potential funding changes?
Sure, thank you, Mayor. Page 1 of the document includes sort of our description of revenue or expenditure adjustment. So everything that we've included within revenue increases underneath that title are all items that we believe the commissioners could implement this year to see a revenue enhancement. Similarly, we've also identified some expense reductions, again, mainly around the area of personnel. I want to be clear, because I actually did have this question. None of the positions listed under the expense reductions are existing positions. So we would not be laying anybody off if we were to seek out those expense reductions. Conversely, these are new positions that we've included in the budget, which we could simply remove. So in terms of the revenue increases for this year, we've included the increase in property tax. You'll recall that the charter limits the city to collecting a cap of $3 million in property tax. So that addition would be to get us closer to the $3 million cap, an additional $850,000, and we've backed into a property tax rate of 8.5 cents per $100 of assessed value. We had also talked about at the last meeting increasing parking meter rates. One of the rates that...
I'm sorry, if you would just make sure you hit on time constraints for property, increased property taxes, for instance.
Sure.
Have a time constraint on them.
Yeah, so both property tax, that is something that we have some additional time. It's, I think June is typically when the commissioners set the property tax rate. So we have additional time, but again, what were tasked with at the last meeting was to identify what that increase would be. So we've arrived at 8.5 cents per 100 of assessed value, which would bring in roughly $850,000. Parking meter is probably the most time-sensitive revenue enhancement, only because based on whatever rate is determined, we then need to configure the parking meters and work with Park Mobile to reflect that change, and obviously update all of our print and web-based materials. So what was discussed at the last meeting was $3.75. We did have a public comment about the parking meter coin revenue is now $30,000. What we had done was when we projected that revenue, we used the budgeted revenue that we're anticipating for both coin revenue, credit card revenue, and pay by phone. So those numbers have been updated, but they reflect the 25% increase from $3 to $3.75. So that is the most time-sensitive revenue piece of the proposed budget. The second piece, which is also time-sensitive, is the parking permit increases. I think what was discussed at the last meeting was looking at possibly increasing the parking permits 20%. I think we had used 20% when we were considering going from $3 to $3.50. So I have a separate support document in the agenda titled Parking Permit Increases dated February 16th. That is just a simple chart that shows all of our permit types, the current price for the permit, and then what a 20% and 25% increase would yield, given the direction to round up and also use increments of $5. The other thing I just want to clarify is that the commissioners did adopt an ordinance January 19th, which eliminated the weekday daily and the weekend daily in favor of just a daily parking permit at $20 currently. So parking permits and parking meters are certainly the most time-sensitive revenue sources. The second sort of time-sensitive revenue increase would be increase in rental tax. So what we have proposed in this budget is going from 6% to 7%, which would yield roughly $500,000. Sort of the time-sensitive nature of that is that obviously summer's approaching quick and people have already reserved dates and bookings. So again, to try and get out this information as soon as possible, that would be another critical time-sensitive revenue source. And then finally, the wastewater metered sewer going from $14.70 to $17.79. I would defer to Bert in terms of how he arrived at those figures, but the estimated revenue from that is $609,591. So that summarizes the potential revenue increases that we've looked at. In terms of more of a longer-term discussion and maybe what we can begin discussing for the next budget a year from now, certainly permit and license fees are something that I think we need to have a focus on. You'll recall I am in conversations right now with General Code or E-Code Company to put together a fee schedule so that we can have everything on one document that we can look at holistically. So permits and license fees are something that we could look at. Another consideration that we had for this year's budget, but it just was too late, was charging for additional parking permits above and beyond the 2 free permits we give out to the property owners. The revenue source on that is very hard to judge because we know how many permits we give out for free above and beyond the 2. We don't know what the willingness is to purchase those permits above and beyond the 2. So that was...
Evan, just to clarify, you're talking about non-transferable tags for vehicles that are registered to a...
transferable tags. There are 2 transferable tags given out for free, and then there's non-transferable given out for every vehicle registered in the property owner's name. So it would be charging for anything above and beyond the 2 free transferable permits. I think that's, largely what we have started to consider. We can't really give any consideration to the hotel accommodations tax. We are limited to collecting 3%, which we currently collect 3% on that. So I think largely the next revenue source to look at long-term in the future would be any permitting, license fees, and then again, charging for those additional permits.
Thank you, Evan. So you've identified time constraints on some of these items. If we, of course, want to, such as property taxes can be delayed, but if we want to count on the revenue in the budget, then we need to do something soon. So what does soon mean? Budget number 4 meeting is March 4th. Budget number 5 is March 15th. So we want to start concluding on March 4th the best we can. and any final decisions need to be made by March 15th because we're voting on it at that meeting. Correct?
Yep.
Okay.
The other thing I just wanted to add, I neglected to mention it, the expense reductions, we do have retained 80/20 health insurance coverage. So one additional benefit that we did propose in this budget to the employees was having the city pay for 100% of the employee-only health insurance premium. So retaining the 80/20, there is certainly a cost savings there, and that is retaining the current program. So that would not be taking anything away, so
So
to speak.
question, a couple of questions, if I may. Since you raised the 80/20, under the expense reductions, a question that came to mind for me immediately when I looked at this is, you know, we as a body have agreed that that it's important for the city to be properly resourced. So immediately what comes to mind for me is when I see this, with the exception of the 80/20, and I'll get to that in a minute, but if I look at the others, what does that do to the spirit of being properly resourced, Evan?
It certainly goes against that spirit.
Thank you. And with regard to the 80/20, it seems reasonable to me that we could implement this as it is, or leave it as it is today, if we get the compensation picture right. But if we don't get that right, then to me, this doesn't make sense.
Can I just say a couple of things? Sure. So with the 80/20, knowing that that's something that could get cut, we can't do 100%. Maybe this isn't the right year for it. I've ran some more numbers that didn't get done in time to get them into this one, but another option that is a savings of $250,000 off this would be just for, so we did our compensation study, get that stuff passed, get those salary increases, and then the city absorb the whole 17% increase in health insurance this year so that we don't give a raise and then take back half of it for an increase in health insurance. So instead of going to 100%, maybe we just absorb that, because right now the way the code is, the city would absorb 13% and the employees would take 4% in the calculation. So if the city just took the whole 17%, it would cost us a little over, it is $48,000 to do that instead of $296,000. So that's another option that maybe we can't go 100% this year, but we can still keep them getting a good raise without, so we don't hit them with the health insurance increase.
That's thoughtful. Thank you for doing that calculation.
The 296,370, that would assume 100%?
That's 100% of the employee cost. There's still a 80/20 about split between the family and the spouse coverages.
And we don't have a distinction between 2 adults and then family, right? It's 80/20?
So we have 4 plans. We have the employee only, we have employee and child, we have employee and spouse, and then family is anything that's not employee, those are 3, so.
Right. But besides it's 80/20 currently for all 3 of those plans outside of the
Just about,
employee.
yeah.
And talk a little bit about what type of recruitment tool the health insurance package is.
So it doesn't come up all the time, but it does, you know, it's definitely, it's about a $2,500 difference between the employee's take-home pay if they have to pay the employee insurance or if they don't. So that is an increase in their take-home pay if we pay it all. Now, some of our surrounding communities over the last few years have gone to 100% health insurance. So locally here, it's more recruiting than it is necessarily somebody coming from further away, because you could go close by and get 100% health insurance.
Thank you. On the issue of removing these staffing additions, Evan, you said it certainly goes against the principle that we have been hopeful for. And some promises made, or it's certainly implied to our constituents that, you know, we would be able to have additional staff, et cetera. How bad do you think this is? Is this all of the additional staffing that was going to be requested? Was it these 6? I mean, these 5? I don't know if my question's making sense, but this whole notion,
That's not staff.
the whole notion of not, you know, just discarding these positions for this year is troublesome to me. I don't know how others feel, but I'm trying to get a handle on if we have no other option other than to not staff what we thought we needed.
I have mixed feelings on some of them. But perhaps, Evan, I think the chief is presenting next week, but I see that, I mean, one of the positions is an additional 911 dispatcher, but my understanding is we haven't been able to fill the current vacancies we currently have, right?
As of last Monday, we have bodies in there at our staffing level, but it takes about 6 months to train somebody, and we could lose someone in that training.
Okay,
So
but-
right now, we have the bodies, but we don't have them all trained.
Okay. But we are potentially fully staffed at this point.
If we do not add another position,
Right.
we would be fully staffed once they're all trained.
Excellent. Well, it hasn't not been that way for quite a while, so that's good to hear.
For these revenue sources, Evan, you also indicated maximum increases. I just want to review those real quick. The increase in property tax, you said, is limited by the charter. The next one is parking meter rates. There is no limitation on it. Increase in parking permits, there is no limitation. Increase in rental tax. What is limiting that, if anything? Can we only go to a max of 1% increase?
I don't believe so.
I don't know if there's any state law.
Well, I think the only limitation would be on the hotel piece. And I can just talk briefly, Bethany Beach, for example, they charge rental tax on everything, commercial and residential properties. And for a hotel, since the state takes 8%, they, I think, are only charging 3 or 3.5%. So they give the hotels a lower rate because they're paying the state accommodations tax than a residential property, which is paying 7% right now.
Yeah, Bethany Beach
7%
had
Bethany.
Bethany Beach had, I believe, a unique situation before the state law allowed hotels because they were charging a greater percentage than what the state law allowed, and I think they were grandfathered to be able to keep that.
Yeah, I think that's where your cap is on the hotel piece.
Okay. And then the wastewater, so I'm hearing there's no limit to increase in rental tax. How about the wastewater metered sewer? You got a very specific proposed increase there. How did you determine that formula? Because I don't think ultimately there's any
Well, I was using a
restriction on how high we go.
Actually, that $17 was a number. When I went back and looked at the Abrams study that they did several years ago, because they had calculated, and when I got done with my calculation, I just wanted to check theirs to see how close we were, and we were pretty much a match. So it was something that we knew, 4 or 5 years ago, that was what was gonna occur. So basically, the 1470 to 1779, I was just, I had basically just calculated revenue that
Be able to move
I was
somebody.
going to need, and it that 1779, I backed into that number.
So back when the Abrams study was done, I recall we came up with this number comparable. And from that point forward, multiple times we gave warnings, I think, to our constituents that in several years, we're going to be hitting a large expense. So this is something that we've given advance notice on.
It's not a total surprise, but I mean, it's a significant increase. But we knew we were going to have to do that with the outfall project and the costs associated with it.
Well, I just wanted to make sure that the 1779 was accurate with.
So
if
it was
you're
close to
comfortable.
the Abrams.
Yeah.
I can pull up the Abrams, but it was fairly close to it.
So question on it, we talked metered sewer. Are the sewer rate that we charge now a percentage of the water rate?
No, that's a rumor that's gone around the city for, I don't know,
well,
30 years. It has no, the only thing we use to establish the sewer rate is the number of gallons used for the water rate.
Okay.
And then the commissioners decide what rate they want to apply for the sewer.
So there's a separate water rate based on usage, and then a separate rate for sewage based on usage of the
Exactly.
water rate.
That's exactly right.
Okay.
Bert, did you already say what percentage of an increase this is for the wastewater?
Well,
Did you already say it?
I didn't say it.
I could do the math, but I can't.
21.
Well, the reason I was asking about it is in last year's budget summary book, we talked about wastewater revenues for metered sewer will increase by 28% in 2025. So actually, this is better than we expected.
Well, we knew we were going to have to confront this at some point.
And the only observation I've got is I would imagine there are very few people in town that recall any of these pronouncements that have been made in the past, even though they've been made, even though they're in writing of what to expect, and we go all the way through 2029 by increasing it at 15%. So my only point is people may be taken aback because I don't think we have necessarily continued driving home that these rates would be going up significantly every year incrementally as we've outlined in this document, which I think this document to me is a treasure trove of, you know, what we've actually agreed to in the past.
That's right. Well, you attended those meetings, I recall, so you're
Yes.
pretty well up to date on it, or well informed.
So would you propose or consider doing a 28% increase this year, or do the 21% this year and then reevaluate for next year, 2 years in a row? Do you have any thought? What would a 28% increase? How much? $1,881. Thank you, Carolyn.
I'm not recommending that we do that. I'm just getting concerned, as I think everybody is, about the whole picture.
Well,
And-
I think in our communication, we need to go back to the original time when the rate study was done and what was voted on and some of the language that was included in that. Because I think it's going to be lost. I mean, I attended most of those meetings, and the only reason I know that, hey, we've got big capital expenditures that are coming up in 2025 and 6, 7, 8. But otherwise, I wouldn't remember the fine print at the end of that stuff. The only thing people cared about was that year their rates were going up and they weren't happy about it.
That's right. Well, I think one of the factors you have to bear in mind, if you look at what we've budgeted for the wastewater treatment, I mean, we're actually not going to have a surplus. We're going to have a deficit in that program. And so if you really wanted to balance it, it would take a lot more. But you know, what we do, the water rates were not raised, and we'll have basically a surplus that pretty much offsets the deficit in the wastewater treatment operation.
Well, just FYI, the 21% increase takes us to 1779. The 28% increase to 1881. So essentially, it's a dollar difference, just for our information.
Evan, Mayor, question for Evan. On the property taxes, where do we stand relative to some neighboring communities?
Sure,
And I
so-
don't necessarily need to have specifics, but just a general.
Start off by comparing us to Dewey Beach.
Well, Dewey Beach does not have a property tax, so.
Dewey Beach, has zero property tax, so eliminate them.
I did talk a little bit with Bert about this yesterday, and I think the challenge with comparing the property tax rates is that the assessment on a property is going to vary. Here,
But just on that point, does that matter really?
it does.
Why does it matter?
So Bert can probably
The
explain this
assessed
better than
value
I
of a
could.
property is the assessed value of a property.
Yeah,
What a municipality decides to charge for that on a tax basis is a separate decision.
I can answer that for you if you'd like, sir. The assessed value between communities can vary widely. You know, it depends on where they do it. I think what's most important is what the actual property tax is. And I think the bill for a property tax in Bethany Beach is significantly higher than one for a comparable property in Rehoboth. I can say that from personal experience.
I think the more.
Okay.
I mean, Bethany doesn't have the level of user fees that we have, such as parking. So several years ago, we really learned a lesson back in 2007. Many towns over budgeted transfer tax. And when it crashed and they got half what they thought they were going to get, Bethany Beach, and I have to compliment them, they reacted in the proper way. They knew that they couldn't depend upon that transfer tax revenue. So they had a 40% increase in property taxes around 2008. So end result is, I think if you did some sampling, you'd see that the rates are higher down there.
The reason I ask this is not really to challenge you all at all. It's to a point that Commissioner Sharp made a few seconds ago, which is, at least from my perspective, when I look at page 1, it's concerning. And then when I think about 26, 27, 28, it's even more concerning. Because if I look at this page 1 and we accepted everything that's on here, which I'm not willing to do, I'm not willing to reject the spirit of what we've decided to do, which is to bring our staffing to a level that we believe we need to. So for me, I would not accept those changes. But if you look at this, and we did accept it as it is, and we factor in the contributions that we will make to organizations that have petitioned us for contributions, this looks like we come to zero. Because the contributions that we've been requested are about $400,000. So it looks like we've come to zero, and that to me does not seem like a sustainable or responsible response to a $4 million deficit. And a deficit in out years also that might exceed even this. So the reason I asked the question was not to challenge you, but was more to get us to think about, one, if we need to change our charter, we need to change our charter to anticipate the possibility that we need to use this as a source of revenue. Because the one thing that we shouldn't be doing is tapping into reserves. That is a very slippery slope. It's a very easy thing to do, but it's not something we should do. And if that ends up being the solution on a one-time go, maybe that's what we have to do. But to me, it's a very dangerous path. So I asked the question in the spirit of thinking about the future.
Along those lines, if I may, Bert, could you give us an estimation about, bring it down very simply, of the estimated increase in your tax bill per household? I mean, looking at the last year's budget, the assessed value of the community is $3,545,000 and some change.
That's right.
And I think we've got about 3,300 tax records, if you will.
Approximately, yeah.
Something like that. So if we increase this 8.5 cents, how does that come back to the individual property owner? I guess the average assessed value of the house is like $1 million, $1.2 million in town?
I mean, the easier way to do it is take a look at the difference and then apply that percentage to any individual's tax.
Yeah. Well, yeah, whichever way to come up with it, I'm just...
Well, the short answer is it's fairly painless, for the average property owner when you think about it, because the average property bill in Rehoboth is, in the $600 area. So that increase, I think is going to be less severe than the sewer, for sure.
I don't disagree with you, but I just kind of want to get that conversation going in a sense. I think individuals that I've heard from and others don't have, if you will, any heartburn about a 2.5 cent per 100 tax increase with the services that they receive. And as we have gone through the compensation study and being properly resourced and look at this, I would agree too. I think for the level of service that we need and the investment that we make in our staff and the tools that we need to give them to do their jobs, to me, that's one of the, I won't say low-hanging fruit, it's the wrong term, but that certainly is one of the accessible revenue sources that I think we would strongly look at. And along with that, taking a look at other communities, people question other communities and investigating those others. Several of them have also had those tax caps in their charters, and they have made those changes in their tax caps to either increase it by a dollar amount or increase it on a percentage basis of the actual annual budget. So I think those are some options that we need to look at going forward. And perhaps it would be an opportunity to look at, as we look at the CIP for 5 years, look at projected tax increases over 5 years. There may be none, but just looking at our history, it seems like we do a tax increase about every 4 to 5 years, based on looking back at about the year 2000 is where we started.
Well, that's an excellent point you just made. We don't raise taxes every year. So what happens after 4 or 5 years, we have an above-average percentage increase. But if you annualize it over that 5-year period, obviously it's going to be a lower number.
And I really want to get on the record, because I've been testing this hypothesis with a number of constituents, that I don't think we should lose sight of the fact that there are quite a few things, and I can speak personally, that I benefit from here in Rehoboth, and we do not collect additional fees for it. And I just thought, off the top of my head, I do not pay an additional fee for recycling or leaf pickup or yard waste pickup or the annual bulk trash pickup or my residential parking permits or the fire department or the 911 center. So when I start thinking about what I really get for the $986 that I pay annually in property taxes, it's an extraordinarily valuable deal in my head. And I wonder if other commissioners disagree with that thinking or think, there is something to the fact that we do not, nor have we ever had what I would refer to as almost like a cafeteria plan. If you want leaf pickup, you're going to pay for leaf pickup. If you want recycling, you're going to pay for recycling. We can tap into these benefits at any moment and pay what I refer to, when you take it down to a monthly dollar amount, it's very nominal.
But what is the number? So I think that's where Patrick was going. Is it $50 more a household? Is it $200 more a household? I know it's going to vary, but when you said it was painless, we're not talking thousands, are you talking hundreds?
It's 41%. So if your property tax is $850, you would now be paying
Another 300 and something.
1,200.
Okay, so it's how many percent?
41%
So we'd have a 41%.
property tax increase.
Yeah, I for one am not for that unless we adjust a realistic parking number as well. And we keep playing around with 25 cents and 50 cents, but I think we really have to let everybody share in the ability to manage the town and make sure things are running properly. I mean, I know we've talked about stair-step programs with parking. That seems to me to be the elephant on the table right now. I don't know when we want to talk about parking, but if beach blocks could be a different price than perhaps other areas, but to just do $375 is not going to cover what we need to do, right?
Commissioner Bennett, I agree with you, by the way, on the pairing the things, but I would suggest that we not just pair those two things, property tax, the potential for property tax change and parking change, but also the other items that Evan has here. The rental tax as well. I mean, it should be all of these.
Oh, no, I agree.
Right?
I think it needs to be looked at as a whole.
Because one is not going to solve our problem.
Right, it needs to be looked at as a whole, but the one big issue for me that seems to be a contentious item here for the last 3 years I've been on the commission is parking. And for some reason, we let everybody else dictate what our parking is rather than what it should be.
I'd like to jump in here, if I may. Excuse me. We have made certain decisions as commissioners about how we envision this city and how we expect this city to be in our minds. And I think we try to cover that for our residents. I think we try to cover that for our guests and visitors and the what I would call the business community, which is obviously the businesses that operate here. But I think when I think of business community, I think of the rental business community, which this community has that not every community has. So I like to, I always use this as my default comparator, which is a terrible comparator, but I'm going to use it anyway. But in comparing, if we were a city like Bridgeville, Delaware, only we don't have a scrapple plant, what would we be dealing with? Then we wouldn't be dealing with the costs of, we don't have a beach, we don't have an influx of tourists that come here every year and all that kind of stuff. So but we have a nice town. They have a nice town. We like our nice town. So what would we be dealing with? So I've always kind of felt, when you look at these revenue streams, there ought to be some relationship between what we're collecting and what it kind of pays for. And I'm not going to be advocating for like let's make a specific a one-to-one connection, with that. But at the same time, if we have the expectation that we want to have a highly functioning city government that serves the community at a high level that we demand, then those kinds of things, if we didn't have if we didn't have all the sort of rental stuff going on and everything, that we would be paying more for that out of property tax. So I'm just saying that generally, and you can I know you can slice and dice this a million different ways, but I would just say in a general way, I think we need to sort of have a reasonableness test, because for what I look at is I've always kind of felt that parking, we have always sort of thought about it as being. We have not reached the upper bound of it, so we haven't exploited it yet. But there is probably a point that you can exploit it. At some point, if it's like $20 an hour or something, maybe people would stop coming here, that kind of thing. So we have to be mindful of sort of what the what the market will bear with regard to these costs and things like that. And so I've always kind of felt that the parking sort of tries to offset the expenses for having the influx of people coming in and those costs that we incur. And then the more of administrative kind of costs that we would want to have for, building and licensing to, to ensure that our housing is done properly and all that kind of stuff, which a piece of that is also rental, so that, you might want to be able to divide that in some way or allocate it. But I guess that's what I'm looking at. I don't want us to get so far afield that we just say, well, if we punch it up by 41%, then we can pay for that, we're done. But I think we need to be a little bit more analytical about it and look at it that these are the things, as to Commissioner Sharp's point, these are the benefits we get. And that's great that we get those benefits, but we should really be thinking about what's it really costing, to do this. And I don't think that's, to lay this burden back on Evan and staff, that you could kind of do a back of the envelope kind of thing and kind of figure out kind of what that would be. Because I think, I just feel like this is going to end up being that the plug figure is going to be parking. And that may be the best way to do it, but I just want to be sure where we are in that process. Does that make any sense?
I think it makes a lot of sense.
Go ahead.
I was going to say one thing, and there are a lot of moving parts in this, but really our total revenue from property tax as a percentage of our budget is extremely low. You're talking 13 to 15%.
Right.
Communities around here that don't have the good fortune to have all these other sources of revenue, their property tax budget will be, anywhere 40, 50% of their total budget.
And I think someone asked you that question about how we compare to other municipalities, and that it's not how much per $1,000, it's what percentage of the revenue is a percentage of the budget is really how you compare. And we're significantly low compared to other communities.
Yeah. There was a time, and I never worked for a credit rating agency, but there was a time when I understood in Rehoboth that worked against us because as far as bond ratings, of course, we don't have a bond rating now, but because so much of our revenue was dependent upon user fees and not something that would be guaranteed like property tax, that could impact your credit rating. But my last discussion when we did the refinancing, the gentleman at J.P. Morgan Chase said it didn't matter. They felt comfortable with it. But, but that is something to consider. I mean, when you have such a low percentage of guaranteed revenue, people could argue that the rental tax is pretty much guaranteed every year. We'd have to have a catastrophe. But, a slight downturn in the real estate market, it chopped our transfer tax in half. Back in 2007, 2008. So it is dependent upon economic activity.
Well, and the county too, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. So,
Are we looking to? I've got a lot of thoughts and they're all over the place, but I'm trying to see how to bring this to some sort of consensus or
Well, let me interject this, Ed. The intent of today's meeting, and for me, was for us to have learn more of the big picture, and then the second half of the conversation to be discussing how and if we want to try to balance the budget. If we do, then what are funding mechanisms that we need to look at? And so that's the intent of today. We don't have to come to any conclusions at this meeting, but understand that in the 2 o'clock meeting, we have the opportunity to vote. And while the afternoon agenda mentions voting on these same 4 things, the intent is really to only vote on parking permit fees if we want to, gross receipts, rental tax, because those we have the draft ordinances in there. We don't have draft ordinances nor in for property tax or wastewater rates, nor do we have the time constraint like we do for the others. So that's where, again, at the conclusion of today's, we don't all have to come to agreement that it's X dollars. We may want to wait for the public to voice some opinion later, but I think we definitely need the conversation.
If
Go
you'll
ahead.
allow me, I am going to ask just a few questions of Evan related to the budget, and then I'm going to try to bring this all together in my recommendation moving forward, and we'll see how that goes.
Put your neck on the chopping block
In a very, I'm going to try to do it in a methodical way.
Go ahead.
Evan, because I think going forward, in my mind, there's a few things we need to do. We need to look at the expense reductions and think about, are we okay with those being reduced or not? I think there's some capital improvement plans that we really need to look at and say, even some of the ones that are a few years out, are we actually going to do that or not? Or do we just get it off the plate? And talk about what our priorities are. We got the staff's priorities on what they've listed, but we've not talked about our priorities on where we think some of these lie. So my first question is related to capital improvement projects. I see Lake Gerard accretion and restoration was put out to 2026. It was actually approved for this fiscal year, and it hasn't been done. Why?
It actually, so my recollection was the stormwater utility task force or group made the recommendation to not do the accretion restoration project until the stormwater master plan was completed. So that work is ongoing. So with that in mind, we've held off on the accretion restoration project.
Okay. Looking at another project that was, and this is more out of my curiosity and if it was articulated to DNREC or not, but we budgeted $40,000 to resurface the tennis courts at Deauville. Was that done?
No, that was not done.
So there's $200,000 worth of capital improvement projects that were in the budget for this year that were not done. And I'll get to that point a little bit later. With that, looking at other revenue sources, I do believe that we can certainly look at mercantile license income and building permits and appeals income. I think it's very important to look at both of those. We're budgeting pretty low on building permits when we're looking at pretty significant, very expensive, multi-million dollar projects potentially happening in that fiscal year, and we're not accounting for those at all. And again, we haven't looked at mercantile license fees for a long time, and I think some of them are way undervalued. Now, looking at the potential revenue increases that you've outlined before, I completely agree with Commissioner Sharp statements about property taxes. One of the things you didn't list is we have a full-time police department that's here year-round protecting us, that I don't think a lot of people consider that. And it's what makes us have a safe place, which is one of the most valuable things I can think of. So I think that all of the potential increased revenue, potential increases in revenue that you've listed, we absolutely have to do. And I don't disagree that while going from 325 or 3 to 375 might be modest, we might need to look at that block by block, closest to the ocean. But at least right now, when we have to make a decision, it signals that we're serious about keeping tourist revenue in line with our property owner revenue, and that we're not taking either for granted, while in this spring we very detailed and holistically look at parking in general and come up with an actual plan for the future and for the next few years. The only thing that, and I think the increase in rental tax from 6 to 7% is absolutely appropriate. It hasn't been increased in quite some time. And I think the increased parking permits of 20% is in line with the meter increases, and I still think it makes us pretty consistent with the surrounding areas. I'm a little indifferent whether we do 21% or 28% on the wastewater metered, but I think an increase absolutely has to happen. And then I think we need to look at the expenditure reductions that were just never actually put in. I've got some certain feelings about some of the positions. I certainly think we need to look at the employee health insurance and increase that from the 80-20, at least on the employee side. And then Commissioner Preston made a comment about not wanting to dip into reserves, and I generally agree with that. We have a rainy day fund, but our fund balances have increased significantly year after year after year after year because we never dip into it. And for example, we just if from last meeting to this meeting, if our deficit amount didn't go from 3.3 to just over 4 million, the only change is $400,000 on one project isn't going to be expended in this year and is now going into next year. The 50,000 or the 80,000 for the LED retrofit not being spent in this year, going into next year. 152,000 for the Lake Gerard accretion, not spent this year. 40,000 for the tennis courts, not spent. So taking some of that money to use it in the upcoming year that we know it's needed or is now going to be expended is not necessarily a bad thing. But we do need to have a fund balance policy where it dictates what we can actually do and what we can take from year going over. And if we do want to have these big projects like streetscape, we need to start thinking about, let's let all that money accumulate in the fund balance, and let's plan on some of that paying for this big project 5 years from now.
So
Those are my thoughts.
Thank you for that. I just want to quickly respond to the last bit of your thoughts. I thought your thoughts were really well articulated, and generally agree with most of them. If we had a fund balance policy, I probably would agree with you, but I have experience that shows that this is an easy way out. And it's an irresponsible thing for a governmental body to not take its own decisions to deal with the problems that it faces when you have a bucket of money sitting there that you know you can tap into. It's just not a responsible pathway to go down. The other thing I would say is, I don't know what of those funds are encumbered or will cost us penalties if we tap into them. You would know that. I assume that they're not all freestanding and that we couldn't just go grab them. Don't need a response to that. And I agree with you, generally speaking, but it's not an answer to this year and next year and the next year and the next year and the next year. And when you look at the capital budget, it is sizable sums of money, and it's not. And this year, we're not even close to what those numbers look like in the out years. So we have to solve the problem more holistically, and that's. I might be willing to agree to a one-time use of reserve funds, but only one time.
Can I ask you for clarification? Yeah. On holistic parking, it's in my head that we are beginning those discussions in April.
Okay.
I think based on I would feel better if, and I suggested May before, I think we should move up to April because to me, it's that important. Because I thought what we would be doing at that time would be looking at all fees in addition. This is a holistic view of every type of revenue. That's what we talked about some weeks ago. So I'm all in favor of that. And I just wanted to make sure that if there is any appetite to continue our energy around solving these things, we have an immediate problem to solve, which I completely agree with, and then we go right into the mode of solving for the rest of the next 5-6 years. My opinion.
No, I completely agree.
Okay.
And my comments were, I think the increases that we see now, the 20% on the parking permits and going up to the $3.75 per hour for the parking meters, that for me is an interim step. That is us getting to what is going to be the future.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Well, I think, Don, you mentioned it. I don't want to gloss over it. Evan, the $4 million budget deficit does not include the $395,000 asked for in contributions by the 4 agencies.
That's correct.
So we've got another, so the deficit right now, if we wanted to follow through with all those asks by the 4 agencies, would be $4.4 million. I will support the increase in the rental tax from 6 to 7%, but for me, it has to be effective next year, not this year. And the property and taxes, I think.
So then, Mayor, then that means the deficit just went to 5.
Exactly, and so we have to find what else do we cut? I'm looking at the capital improvement program. I don't know where we are on citywide paving program. I think we started at $350,000. We went to $450. Now we're at $5 million.
Well,
Is it possible that we could cut out 1 year? I don't know.
Well, while you're on the citywide paving program, one of the things that I took a drive the other day down Baltimore and Wilmington just to see sort of the state of those streets. And, we have the Baltimore-Wilmington Streetscape project listed on here, but is it a reality that we're ever going to do that? And if it isn't, why aren't we taking care of those streets now? Like, if we're not going to do this project for another 5, 6, 7 years, the streets, Wilmington is not in good shape today. Manhole covers are a couple inches above the pavement. There are potholes on the street. And I'm not being critical of our team at all, because the logic that they've used is perfectly sound, because we have it here and we say we're going to do it, but are we really going to do it? And so if we aren't really going to do it for another 4, 5, 6, 7 years, then the budget that we have for maintaining our streets is not actually an accurate budget. It would be more. Is that fair, Evan? Yeah?
Evan, did the analysis by Kershaw, I think, that went at Kershaw, did their analysis ignore streetscape and maybe include Baltimore Avenue or Wilmington Avenue?
Yeah, I would have to defer to the Director of Public Works, but I think at the last budget meeting that we had when Kevin was here, he did say it was either Baltimore or Wilmington, he said, is a priority that needs to be done within the resurfacing project.
He said Wilmington.
Wilmington.
Yes.
But we have held off on it because of
That's
streetscape.
exactly what he said.
Right.
I think
So
you
you could
mentioned
be right. It could be that we hold off on Baltimore because that's hopefully gets realized sooner than later, and then we address Wilmington. So that's, I think, a good point.
Yeah, I think we talked about Baltimore in the sense that it doesn't make sense to do it until the Beach Patrol building is done and the new
Because it's going to
hotels
get
are built.
demolished. Yeah.
Mayor, what did you say you were not in favor of the increased rental tax for a year? Is that
Yeah, I was a
what-
landlord, and I would not have appreciated getting an increase in rental tax after I've already executed contracts and received deposits and from my rental tenants, because it's not something that I would be comfortable with, nor probably legal, asking them for more money after the fact. So I just.
Well, why would you have to ask anybody for it? Couldn't you take it out of your own profit?
Oh, sure, and I don't want to do that either.
Because?
Because you're taking money out of my pocket.
But we're going to
Well, my
ask our
per-
homeowners to do
Well-
it, the taxpayers to do it.
Well, including me.
No, I mean, that's, all of us have to bear the brunt.
Exactly.
It's like us waiting for printing for the parking stuff, which is great.
I'm just one person there, bud.
No, I'm just wondering why you would want to defer it for a year. Should we defer it all for a year? And give everybody time to get ready for it. I mean, that's kind of the logic, right?
No, that's not valid at all.
No.
I can't quite align myself with your justification, but
fine.
that's okay.
That's fine.
Yeah.
Then we can think about approving 2 years this year. An increase next year and an increase the following year. You can do that too.
I mean, the other thing you can do is just say, you know, effective this date going forward, any new contracts for rental or rental houses, you know, it's effective.
Do we have the capacity to do that? I mean, that's the real question. And it comes back to
To monitor it.
to enforce.
Monitor anything anyway. We don't enforce any, the only, what
Well, that's what I'm saying.
What that means is we're gonna put an extra line on the rental remittance form that says, what did you have at 6%? What did you have at 7%? I mean, it's no different than every other single year going backwards to the 50s.
So look, this is on the agenda for this afternoon for possible vote on parking fees and rental tax. Have we maybe exhausted enough conversation up here? We could go to the public and then end this meeting and take it up again at the afternoon meeting. Because otherwise, we're going to be redundant, I think.
The only other thing I'll say, because I talked about potential revenue, is bus permits. I think we currently budget at 1,000, and these are huge groups of people that come and utilize our bathrooms, trash, beach. So I really think we need to look at that number and how it's collected, perhaps at our next meeting.
And for a bus,
I just want
do
to,
they size buses? You know,
No,
because
so
there's a school bus that only holds 10 people, and then there's a school bus that holds 30 people.
so the bus permits account is for any bus coming in and wants to rent a space in the convention center parking lot. We actually upped that fee 3 years ago, 4 years ago, maybe. I think right now what it is $250 for the day. If you want to park overnight, it's an additional $100. So I haven't yet compared to see whether the increase in that fee led to less users.
So if a bus drops a lot of people off at the bandstand, we don't charge them a drop-off fee?
They are not supposed to drop off at the bandstand. They need to drop off here. There is no fee unless they are parking for the day or overnight.
So I think that's a void that we need to address, because if they dump 40 people here on one of those biggest buses, then that's 40 people using our beach and restrooms and different facilities that aren't paying anything. Zero. The only problem with that and a lot of things is, how do you monitor it? How do you enforce it? You're going to go there, we're going to station somebody there to count the number of people getting off the bus? Beach tags?
Beach tags. That's the only way you could do it.
Well, you also, again, getting too details, but an LPR, if the bus is coming into town, you track it. And if they don't have a permit, an annual permit of $1,000, $5,000, you know, in town or in Washington, D.C., to pick up and drop off at Union Station, there's a monthly charge of $2,500 per bus, okay? So, again, there are systems out there to manage this, and if we're interested in that much revenue, you know, we've got all kinds of bedroom communities around here that have a community bus that picks up at the rec center at 8 o'clock in the morning or 10 o'clock in the morning, loads their family in or their grandkids and everything with beach chairs, come into town, drop them off, then the bus comes back at 5 o'clock, picks them up. You know, we're hosting all of those individuals. And I just don't think it's, there is a revenue opportunity there that we're missing, and we have missed for years.
So earlier you mentioned business, review of business license fees, licenses would be for next year. Do you think we could do the buses this year, or that should also be next year also?
Don't we do, what's the cycle on the license fees?
The cycle on the license fees.
Are we on a calendar year now?
Some are.
So any changes we made, we would still get in FY '25.
Right. Renewals are usually for business licenses are in January.
Yeah, end of January? Oh, so
We
we're
could still
beyond
do
that.
it for FY '25.
Correct.
Yeah.
Right. But not as part of this exercise, I don't think.
That's for April.
Right.
And also in conjunction with that, though, if we issue like we have the sticker you put in your window for a resident parking, it could be similar for a bus. But we also then have to put into effect fines for, illegally dropping off, if you will, if you don't have a permit type of thing. I mean, it hands in hand, and I don't disagree that we need to do it.
Absolutely.
All right. If we can go to the members of the public, is there anybody here who would like to say anything about the budget? Patty, come on ahead first, and then Jay will have you in the queue. And Carolyn, too, I won't forget you. Patty, say your name and relationship.
I'm Patty Brown, One State Road, Rehoboth Beach, Delaware. First of all, for your wish list, if you're gonna add cameras to ocean, up on the ocean, you need to add them down by the canal, because you're gonna have those boats coming in, and there's gonna be some problems. Okay, second of all, with the permits, I think you should check around town and see what places that don't have meters and put the meters there first. And if you add on instead of September, keep it going until October for the festival, because they need to put some money into the town too. Okay?
Okay. Thank you, Patty. Jay?
Can I go over here by the,
Sure.
by the podium? I'm going to go as fast as I can.
You have a PowerPoint?
No. Is this on? Okay. We good?
Your name and
I'm,
relationship.
I'm the same guy. I'm Jay Legree. I live at 7 Prospect Street. Trying to find the money. The residents, the property owners are given 1.6 million of the money that you've designated that we need. And the other part comes from, mostly from parking, which is a little bit less, 1.2 million. I pay $712 a year, I pay $588 a year for my sewer. I'll pay $712 when we get that in. That's $124. And it wasn't a 5-year flat fee, it was a 4-year flat fee. And I think, Brooke can correct me, but Henry, isn't this new fee the $17.70, what the utility task force recommended in 2019? Isn't that how we arrived at that? The $17.70? Anyway, that's 21%. And we went 5 years, not 4. They told us 4, we went 5. So that was a little better. You're raising parking 25%. Why don't you raise it 33%? You're raising property taxes 41%, which is what Bethany raised theirs back when they lost the transfer tax. We raised ours 50% with the previous administration, if you recall. So we're raising significant taxes on the property owners, and there's more to come. We're going to have a stormwater fee of about, probably conservatively, God, I hope nobody's listening, $250 a year. So that's just conservative. We're going to hit the residents, the property owners, with some pretty significant increases. That's why I say we should raise parking not 25%, but 33%, which would get us up to $4. And I'd say $5 we start. Because the people who are renting, oh, by the way, if you're paying $15,000 for a rental house on Queen Street, which is right in my street, and you raise it 1%, you raise it $150. So that doesn't seem like a lot to worry about. But on the other hand, you're not notifying people, and the rentals have to be notified. You can't rent your house out and then say, oh, by the way, I'm going to charge an extra $150 for the week, although it's not much. You get a lot of kickback on that. I pay $1,000 a year on property tax. If you raise my property tax, I'm going to pay $1,400. But everybody's going up, and that's the thrust of what I'm saying here. Oh, by the way, why are we not raising water rates? We've had cost of living increases everywhere else. We pay our electric bill to Delmarva Power, and they're raising their rates. God knows you should see what the insurance on my house has been done the last year. So everybody's raising rates. We just need to sit down and figure what the cost of living is and raise our rates and tell our people we're going to raise our rates 3% a year or 2.5% a year, or whatever it is, so they can plan on it. And then we do it. And that lets us plan for the future. I could talk about a bunch of other stuff. Tony, you pay trash $700, $800 a year. That's for recycling and everything. So you're paying for it. At least I pay. Don't.
Well, but we don't pay a separate fee.
Yes, we do. It comes in our bill.
No, we do not. It's a zero line item in our water bills.
Mm-hmm. Oh, somebody needs to talk to you.
Well, I brought my water bill.
I won't say your last name.
It says recycling, zero line item.
You pay trash once a year, comes out of your utility bill.
No, I pay, yes, I do.
Okay, let's go back to where I was. Bunky, the market will bear what we need to find out what the market will bear for parking. We need to raise it to 5 or to 4 or something, and then evaluate whether the shuttle's being used or not. We want people to use the shuttle to help our parking problem.
But the business community is concerned about that.
Yes, they are.
Yeah, and rightly so.
If we get our parking rates up fairly high, that shuttle will be more popular than it ever is. And I think that's our goal over the next 20 years, something like that. Don, I agree, but we should never go into our reserves unless we're absolutely in an emergency. And I think that's Bert's philosophy too. Oh yeah, our taxes are low. If I go to $1,400 a year, that's low when I'm comparing to what I used to pay in Texas or what people pay in other parts of the country. Still, it's a minor part of that 37 million. And that's the way it is. That's why we come to Delaware. So take it from there. I just say we need to raise the parking right now 33%, and I can go along with all the other stuff. And yeah, the 21% that we raised, well, wastewater could be 28, but we need to start doing that every year, 3%, just like Commissioner Schlosser argued for back in 2019. And that's what we should have been doing. We should do the same thing on water, and I don't know about trash. We renegotiate that every 3 years or so. Thank you for all this time. And thank you for everything you do.
Thank you, Jay.
Thank you, I'm not there.
Carolyn, either one's fine.
Carolyn Diefendorfer, city resident. First, we don't pay enough in property taxes. Raise them as much as you can and go through the process to do a charter change and get them up. Because it's, when you talk to people who move here from Maryland, Pennsylvania, Jersey. It's laughable how little we pay. So raise them. And I think you're going to get, I think people would rather pay a higher property tax than they would a higher sewer bill. Because if they have enough deductions, they can deduct their property tax. They can't deduct their sewer bill on their taxes. So that would be the one thing. I don't disagree that parking needs to be increased, but I worry about raising it too much and impacting the businesses, because we do get revenue in the form of business tax or business license fees. And if we drive people away, businesses will leave town. We won't get that business license fee. So I do worry about how much we attempt to increase the parking. But I do think there's room to increase it. I personally think we should just go where the others have gone. If Dewey's going to 350, let's go to 350. Raise the permit fees, though, too. They need to be raised at the same time. And as a property owner, I would not be opposed to having to buy some of my permits. Maybe as a property owner, you get to buy your permits at a reduced rate instead of having them provided for free, but versus going to the full rate. Maybe there's something in between. I don't know. The other thing I would point out is I do think we need to raise the rental tax. I think you can come up with an effective date that gives them enough warning. Maybe it's 10/1. Maybe you get them at the beginning of a quarter, because I don't know how many have already rented for next fall. But those same owners of those properties will be getting hit with the increased property taxes, the increased water, increased sewer, whatever else. And lastly, we can't do this for this year, but 2+ years ago, you all started talking, for those of you who were here, you talked about garbage, the trash fees. We need to revisit that. I happen to have a garage apartment. I do not rent it out. I occasionally have family come and stay. But because I have a garage apartment, I pay 2 fees. So I am paying more for trash than the 9-bedroom rental across the street from me that routinely has 3 or 4 cans out per pickup. So I think that needs to be picked up again. We need to, revisit that whole thing about somehow coming up with a pay-as-you-throw approach. So, thank you.
Thank you, Carolyn. Anybody else? Thank you very much. With that, go to the order. Is there anybody who has any last words up here? Again, we're going to be entertaining the opportunity to vote on parking fees and gross receipts rental tax this afternoon. So anybody of the public wants to come again and reinforce what you had to say, you'll be welcome. And anybody up here?
So the parking, or when we vote, are we voting on the 375?
We're voting on whatever the motion.
Whatever
is.
okay.
Yeah, but I anticipate there might be some more, hopefully more discussion, although minimal perhaps.
And then at what point will we address the increases in property taxes and the water meter?
That would be at the March 4th budget meeting, number 4.
And those
I think earlier you said we would vote on that on March 15th.
No, I'd rather accelerate it, I think. Evan, is that all right with you? So it's just a matter of getting draft ordinances done.
And then are we going to have further discussion based upon the expense reductions that were presented, whether we were agreeable to those or not, or is that discussion done?
It would be nice to resolve that today, if possible.
I'll start. I do not support any of the expense reductions except for retaining the 80/20 health insurance coverage, which is where it is today, and only support that if we get the compensation piece of our commitments correct. And the reason, I should say, the reason that I don't support One, removing the deputy chief of police, removing the entry-level police officer, removing the 911 dispatcher position, removing the part-time deputy city clerk, and removing the part-time communications specialist is because of the commitment that we have made to making sure that we're properly resourced. And an affirmation by the city manager that if we were to accept these expense reductions, we would be essentially rejecting our previous commitment.
Well, let me follow up with that, Commissioner, to Evan. If we accept these removals to lower the expense reductions, do we really become unresourced? I don't know what the word, but you know,
It's not that, Mayor. Sorry, I know you didn't ask the question of me. We have made a commitment on the record as a board that we believe that the staff is not properly resourced and that we should empower them to be properly resourced and that we would dedicate the resources to getting there.
but I've got to leave that to my city manager to determine whether we're properly
And he
resourced
answered
in
my
all
question
these.
earlier.
Can we never, ever get rid of any position?
I don't think he is suggesting that, but I asked the question of the city manager earlier. If we were to accept these changes, how would that fit in the spirit of being properly resourced? And he answered the question.
While I don't disagree with you, 3 of these
Does that mean you
positions-
agree with me?
In part. I mean, 3 of these positions we've never even talked about, heard of, or there's never been any justification on why, nor has it ever been brought up that we were not already properly resourced. 2 of them, yes, but 3 of them, no. So
Can you identify the 3?
the 3 related to the police and 911 center. So I have a hard time accepting that we're not properly resourced there since we've never heard about it, nor have we ever talked about it. Every time that we've talked about not being properly resourced has been related to being able to communicate effectively, directly, well, and be more proactive, and with our ability in building and licensing to get things done in a timely manner, and to enforce the codes that we already have. So I agree with you on those 2 fronts, but the other 3 positions that that we've never even talked about or heard about before, I don't agree with you on those.
Well, I just
But
instinctively, Ed, sorry, removing a deputy chief of police sounds to me like a bit of insanity. Because what if the chief of police dropped dead tomorrow? You don't have a deputy chief of police who can fill that void.
I'm sure that I have confidence that the chief has had some succession planning in place.
That's not the point. The point is we have all acknowledged that we don't have deep benches. And we're not suggesting that we should have deep benches, but that we should have a bench. So, and frankly, honestly, if you look at these numbers, they're actually quite small.
A little over 400,000 for the 5 positions. And with Commissioner Chernowski, I agree with you about building and licensing issues and communication issues. Those are the 2 challenges that we hear all the time. And I think the communication specialist part-time and deputy city clerk are desperately needed. We've had a part-time communications, or rather part-time deputy clerk on and off, but to have a dedicated person that is here to the number of postings that are needed to happen, FOIA, addressing FOIA complaints, just the workload certainly increases. And as we talk about other options of things that come up, for instance, Deauville Beach, about a communication plan, better parking maps, these types of things, that communication person, second part-time person, I think is critical. As we go and our visitors and our residents demand more about communications. We have Reach Out Rehoboth, and we have also just had a few conversations in the last meeting about how the system is working, gaining information, but how do we react to it and what comes through? So again, I think those two positions I can support wholeheartedly. And you also look at the number of events that are happening in this community and how they've grown over the years, and that falls right to the police department to manage, and with the aspects of homeland security requirements that are coming up, with horrible events in our United States that happens with regards to mass casualties. I don't know if any of you had the opportunity during Sea-Witch to go over to the school area, and there was a complete mass casualty setup prepared to happen if, God forbid, something like that happened. So again, supporting those pieces of security with greater and greater number of people coming into the city, I just think that we should support those without question.
Well, and I'd like to make the observation, if we were not able to support additional positions recommended by staff, we certainly better not be in the business of approving grants. Those two things are diametrically opposed, in my opinion, that our staff, our resources come first. Grants have got to come in a lesser priority. So,
Well, if you had the grants and the staff, you're at 800,000, right?
yeah.
I guess, at least for 3 of these positions, I was reserving judgment because we've not even heard from the police or 911 yet.
Well, what I would
so
say
we're
is-
kind of, we're looking at something, we haven't even looked at that part of the budget yet. Or
And
heard from the chief.
in an effort to not delay that discussion any further, the chief is here today, and he's prepared to talk to these positions if you'd like to entertain that discussion.
I think he should. He's waited all morning.
Pull that microphone a little to you. Thank you.
Well, good morning, and yes, I am prepared to talk about some of it. I don't have what I submitted to the city manager in front of me. I didn't know it was going to come up this morning and all, but I will say that a few months back, I did sit down and come to a workshop meeting and present about where we're at in police department as a whole, and I think even Commissioner Don Preston said, well, I'm hearing from the chief is stress, I think is the word that he used. Just let me start back up to say that April 1 of 25, I don't think this will happen, but 7 of your police officers are eligible for retirement. So if 7 of us walk out tomorrow or April 1, that's what you have. Just in the paper, if you read yesterday's seasonal officers, Ocean City's doing away with theirs. Can't find any. Went from 100 to 24 officers. We're having the same thing. I have 2 officers so far this year with all the enhances that we're doing. We still have some interviews set up, but very few. It all
Sorry,
comes-
could you say that again? You have 2
2
applicants?
right now that's hired so far for this year.
Even with the changes that we've made?
Correct. It all comes down to housing. School students, like in Newark, they've made some changes. So they're renting there for even during summer months to keep their housing. If they live off campus junior, senior years, they move, can't afford to come down and pay rent here too. So if they're not from this local area, it's just not happening anymore. So as far as the police chief, I had to be looking at in the future, those 2 big things to sit there and backfill. As we mentioned about more events and all, we have to handle that. We have a very important person coming in this weekend and all the resources. Our guys are maxed out on that's being mandated to come in for these events and to cover. The reality is they don't want to do it anymore. 7 days a week, week in, week out. So that goes on even during the winter months. Because I have 7 people eligible to retire, I have individuals with a lot of vacation time. Y'all are very generous. They may not be happy I made a comment, but with our holiday and vacation time that we get. So they're maxed out on time. They can't even get the time off. So we're always trying to ask for extensions. Can we get it? So during the summer months, it's really hard for them to take off. So again, we have to fill in. I did a study that I was going to put out when I sit down and talk about it next month with the budget. But minimum staffing for the department is two officers. Several months, we're at 89% at minimum staffing. That don't have 2 people in town, review cameras if it's summertime, and that's even during some of the summer months. And then, but all year round in 2023, it was like 72% that we had just minimal staffing. So again, if you take a supervisor, if that's 1 to 2, and they're doing checks on the complaints that come in, they're handling complaints or doing their supervisory role, really you have 1 officer on the street. And then we ask ourselves, well, I don't see an officer on this street, I don't see on that. Because if you make an arrest, you have the paperwork that has to follow up with it. As far as communications supervisor, we haven't had a supervisor now for 3 years. Quite honestly, I am burning out just headed to meetings up in Wilmington and Dover and taking on additional workload. That it just can't stay in there. I've changed up things, and we've made each shift have a shift supervisor, and we've made what they're doing. But if you're not attending to the meetings, you're missing out on grants, you're missing out on what's coming up next gen and all that. I try to send forward stuff to the IT department, so they are online to sit down and look at some of these upgrades and all, but you have to be in the room to be there. We set a lot of different practices up, so that position has to be filled. There are just no ifs, ands, or buts. The call volumes are too much. Same thing with them. They have, in communications, getting seniority, can't get their time off. So we are just exploding just in overtime pay that could pay for new employees. I mean, you probably put two new employees in benefits and all for what we're doing in overtime, year in and day out. And quite honestly, they're working. I got a dispatcher. Most of my dispatchers in a 2-week pay period, that's 80 hours, they're supposed to be working. They're doing 134 hours. And I'm getting the calls from their spouses and everything else. They don't want to be here because of that. They don't have no home life and all. So it is dire need. I try to paint a pretty picture. They're doing it, but it's aggravating. And we're having to make concessions even into that. We are having to go into dispatch to say, okay, if you can't do 12 hours, can you do 8 hours? Well, then I still have 1 dispatcher in there for 4 hours alone by themselves. Now, we have been able to hire some, but it takes 6 to 9 months to get them trained, all the certifications, and they will not be ready to go on their own for a year. So they're not an extra body. They're just somebody else in there. Now, every day they get better, so can they answer a phone? But they don't have their credentials. They can't sit down because it could be an ambulance, and you have to be EMD'd, EPD, or EFD'd through the call center. So they can't really. They're just kind of listening, and we're shadowing. And let me ask you if anybody's ever done any training or mentoring. If you're responsible for doing that mentoring and that training, and you have to break off to take a call, a 911 call, are you really teaching the person how to do that? No, they're just watching you go through the system. And so we're failing our new hires too, but there is no other way to do that. Normally they'd get one-on-one instruction with the individual, but that just can't happen. Everybody's being great at it. They've all stepped up. But as a leader, I have to sit down and say, we are failing our team and our future. And that's just off the top. Like I said, I can spend hours on here, but it's the backfill and with our events and stuff that's required. And again, if we don't come up with something with the housing, then it's going to be like Deauville Beach, Bethany Beach, Ocean City, Maryland, the ones in Virginia, ones in Ocean City departments. They've all decided to cut back, if not disband their seasonal programs and hire more full-time officers because the reality is they're not going to get them. So again, I can go on. I don't know if I answered any of the questions. That's just top of my head without having the justification that I did send out to the city manager on why these positions are needed. The other thing I didn't mention about the assistant chief or whatever is the backfill is, again, we're talking about accreditation that comes up that's forever. Well, now there is a deadline that the Homeland Security, the governor and all has signed when all these will be done. we haven't even touched that for a good year and a half. We keep updating policies as laws change, but there's just not enough time frame to sit there and get on that and still do evaluations. I think a few months back when I was addressing the commissioners, we talk about policies and every time something changes, and we operate like Ocean City, Maryland, or a Dover, a bigger agency, because of all the events that come in, and that's 100% true. Every seasonal officer has to be trained and all. Well, we got to keep our credentials going on that. So there's a lot of certifications to keep up with that in teaching, and it's all good stuff, but it takes away from the officers being on the road and all that. And the reality is, you've been here for 20 years, you kind of get set at you don't want to go back and do the same thing over and over, and these officers are stuck. And that's an internal thing. I got to keep the motivation up, but it's about backfilling. There's positions within the department that we've just put off on hold. I go into the emergency operations plan if we need to get back onto that. I've been updating it. I'm doing some work on it as we can, but it's really what takes precedence, and our events and things take precedence. Right now, as they come, we just put a stop on it. Yes, we get reimbursed for the events and all, but that's still, we need the manpower to sit there and cover it. And my concern is we're going to start seeing some leave. I've pretty well got 2 commitments of officers leaving next year. Got 2 more that said, hey, I've been here 25, 30 years. If I could find, not quite ready to retire, but if I could find a Monday through Friday job in pension or whatever, if it's capital or capital PD or date or something else, they might take that opportunity. Again, I don't have no way of doing it, but I better listen to them when they tell me that.
Chief, I congratulate you for using the phrase, failing our team and our future.
Absolutely.
And I would just, I want to go on record that there seems to be a lot of that going around here in the city of Rehoboth Beach, that if we don't attack and solve the hard issues, we are failing our team and our future. And I'm going to steal that from you from here on out, because I think that's a perfect way to talk about it. And when I went through my list of things that I felt we got, in addition to just paying our flat property taxes, Commissioner Chernowski had to remind me that in my head, I'm thinking the 911 center are the police, right, but their responsibilities are so much broader than that. Right. So for us to even question that these are needed, to me, they are not only needed, they are essential. So I thank you for your candor.
Thank you. And what I will sit there and say that's not presented, and I hope my boss beside to the right item, he doesn't get upset. I know well enough that he won't. But I actually put in for 4 positions, not just 2 police officers positions, and move up, because think about people leaving, what we need to get done as far as to move forward and educated, and all, and more mandates that Homeland Security has put on through post and all, and the governors and the new legislation, which is great. I think it's all wonderful for law enforcement, but it does, these smaller agencies are going to be at fault. So they actually put in 4. I know was looking at to get cut back, and being that team player and all, I understand and knew where the budget was, so we have to sit there. But I will make it a point that you're going to sit down and see the same 4 next year asked, and if it gets cut 2, but that's going to be a thing to build up. And again, it's not just our agency. If you look around, that is the theme for every department. I think Lewis just put 2 more on this, added 2 more. Deauville Beach did 2 one year and another one this year. They're all just having to add on because of the mandates, and that's a lot of it. Unfortunately, we hear the word unfunded mandates, but that's the reality that where law enforcement in towns are. So I do thank you for your time.
And this infuriates me, because you are a perfect example. You know exactly what you need for the future, and you're dialing it back because we're not facing what is needed for the future. That infuriates me that we put you in that position. And it's not about department heads asking for things that they don't need. It's about asking for essential services that if we don't step up and the whole community doesn't step up, we're going to be the ones who lose.
So as of today, right now, you are not properly resourced.
We are not.
Okay, thank you.
Chief, just to clarify, and thank you for everything you've said. The 911 dispatcher position, is that a new entry-level position or is that a supervisor position?
It would be a supervisor, but it all starts at how law enforcement and military all work. You're bringing somebody else in so you can promote hopefully within. You always want to try to promote within, but if we don't have somebody qualified, then we will go outside. But so I would post it to the 4 shift supervisors now that had all the credentials, and hopefully one of them through a process would be able to do that. But until you get the new ones hired and trained, I would set them up for failure if I promoted any of them right now. Now, let's say all 4 are equal and could hire every one of them would step right into that role. But if I take them off and they're covering a shift and they're training people, I'm failing them. They can't make any of the meetings because they're working shift work and all that. So I'm still going to be taking those meetings. So it's really the commitment of new hires, bringing them on once they're trained and have enough for the floor, then you get that supervisor in. But you can't put one before the other.
Right.
I don't know if I answered your question, but
You did. So I think the better way to phrase this is this would be a new body because I think we already had a supervisor in the past. We already counted that body in staffing, right?
Right.
So we're currently fully staffed. Just one of the current people is not a supervisor. So if we brought an additional body in, we would definitely promote one of those people to supervisor.
If they end up being qualified and all that, I never want to say we definitely will. That would be my ultimate goal. Now, when I say we're fully staffed and the budget has been looked at for the 12th, I'm asking for the 13th, but currently we only have 11. So we're still looking for at least one, possibly a second dispatcher.
And if you advertise for a supervisor and you didn't select one of our existing staff, then you would look outside for a supervisor?
Yes, Delaware is very unique. There's a couple, 2 or 3 in Delaware might already have the certifications. Delaware requires a lot more legislatively than other areas or whatever through the country. So you'd have to bring one in, have certain credentials, and get them up to speed almost like a new dispatcher, all the qualifications through priority dispatch and so on. Are there a couple out there, and would they be interested? I don't know. Somebody might leave the county after 30 years. Would they want to come here? If a state, somebody from the state that's already been a supervisor for that, if they're getting ready to retire, do they want to come and do 5 more years? But I always sit there and try to look at in-house first because I think that's you try to always train your individuals to take over and be smarter than yourselves. Myself, so they should be ready to go, jump up into the positions with a little bit more additional training.
And how many current? Switching to the police now.
Yes.
How many current full-time do we have?
Currently, we have 19. 2 of those, 2 are in academy that will be graduating Friday, March 1st. So then they'll do field training for 12 weeks before they're on their own. So that does get us at 19 officers that we are, that's our minimal staffing. That's what we've been approved for. So these other ones.
That includes you or does not include you?
That does include me, yes.
So that would be another body bringing us, or potential 2 bodies bringing you to 21 then?
Correct.
And just one last question on the structure. So if we were to approve another body that would essentially be a deputy chief, so you would then you would have chief, deputy chief, 2 lieutenants.
Yes, the deputy chief is really, doing the same thing that one individual is already doing, is all the events and the sitting down and doing the investigations, the reviews, all the things, accreditation along with me and all that. But again, it's just like I said about dispatch. It's bringing somebody on and then you get them through the academy, you get them trained and all that. And then what happens is you promote, theoretically you wouldn't promote within, the lieutenant would go up to deputy, then you take a sergeant.
We're not making any guarantees, but
yes,
ideally promote within.
And then you would sit there and then you'd have a lieutenant's position open, so I'd promote sergeant on up to that. So again, it's the bottom person. So you're really bringing somebody in, 2 people in below, so you can start pushing things back up.
Yeah, I understood.
But it's,
Thank you.
it's really, our driving thing is we cannot catch up on because of the events and the different things that we have going on to get our other work done. The other thing is that we can't forget, with the events, we bring in a lot of resources, as it was mentioned earlier about Sea Witch and for managed casualty. So if they're bringing their resources in, we're not paying them, to state, DelDOT, and all. I feel that we're obligated to return a favor when somebody has a Christmas parade in Georgetown or Seaford. Hey, can you send resources? So we send those resources because they're helping us out. But again, it's taking, it's overtime. It's sending people to go there. So it's all the trickle down effects that go into these events and trying to put the briefings together. I mean, to this day and time, you cannot ask for people to come in and not have all the briefings, which gets into the weather and everything else. I mean, we give 45 minutes to an hour briefing before, and then we do after, washes to sit there and see what worked, what didn't work. But it might be a 60-page document that we hand out to the individuals. Now, it's all online and things like that. They get through their phones what positions they're going to be at, what time breaks are at, what resource if this happens, we go here, who's going to be to handle the most complaints, who's traffic control, and those are for all the events, which you have to do and should be doing. So again, that takes time out of doing your other jobs.
Thank you, Chief. One last question.
Yes.
The vacation time, you talked about vacation time and holiday, et cetera. Do you fall under our city policies, or is that part of your collective bargaining? Not yours, but the officers' collective bargaining?
It goes through collective bargaining, so it's in their contract, but it's the same as the other city employees. So with the amount of time a lot of my officers have, they're getting the 5 weeks vacation. Most people can't get their time off, so they hold a week over each time. So therefore, it's 6 weeks trying to get off holidays. And in the police department, by contract, it's 12-hour shifts. And I bring that up because it all interrelates. So it's 7 days out of 14-day cycle that they're actually working. So that's even more when they take a week off somewhere else. It's still backfilling. Now, right now, currently myself and the 2 lieutenants try to fill in the overtime and cover the shifts. So we try to help with that. Because we're not getting the seasonal officers with overtime, and all we sit there and backfill in with grants. That's why we have people up at the bandstand and the farmers market. I mean, the reality is if I didn't have the grants and we're so far in overtime, I would not be covering the bandstand events at all with an officer. We just put traffic cones up and say, have at it.
Good luck.
And I obviously I'll just stand there. And many people that's in this room have seen me up at the bandstand and directing traffic and do that because I just conscientiously just can't allow that to happen. But at the same time, that's still not a fix. That's just a disaster waiting to happen.
This is just a random question because I know it takes up a lot of resources. So I know you have a lot of guys that are ready to or can retire. Do we have any mechanism to hire those people back for events on a part-time basis, et cetera?
Currently, in a union contract, how it's worded, just like with the summer officers, if you need them more often than that, then the union, I don't want to speak for them ever, but in past negotiations, they feel if that's the case, you need to hire more full-time officers. That's telling me you need a position, so why are we trying to backfill people not familiar? In theory, yes, they know our area, but do we want to be bringing people in from Ocean City or something and don't know our codes are this or that? So they've always taken a standpoint. Again, I will not speak for the union, but in past and contract negotiations, they have decided no. We understand you have summer officers for that period, but if you feel you need them for additional things, then you need to be, it means you're short-staffed and you need to hire more. Now, that's their viewpoint. That doesn't say it's right or wrong. That's their viewpoint.
Absolutely makes sense to me. Thank you.
When does the current contract expire?
April or March 31 of 25. So we'll be renegotiating this upcoming fall.
24 or 25?
Well, it goes 25, correct?
25.
Yeah. So I would speculate next October we'd be in contract, hoping to start negotiating, and since while we're working on our budget.
So how do you want to conclude addressing expense reductions. Do you want to come to a consensus today? Would you like to vote on it at the next meeting? I'd like to get it off our plate sooner than later.
I would keep a question mark on the 80/20 on health insurance, but say that we move forward with not accepting the other removals, and we need to find the money.
I would support that at this point. There was some discussion, though, about the 80/20 of absorbing for full-time employees. Was that what Gene was suggesting?
It would be about $48,000 or something just for this year's increase.
Right.
But that doesn't really cover that increase going forward, right?
Right.
Yeah. I would rather have a permanent solution there than try to make some effort just for 1 year.
What would the permanent solution be?
We decide that we go to 90/20 or 90/10, or we're just gonna absorb going to 100%.
I mean, I don't understand any real debate about 100% for a full-time employee, because that's a retention and a recruitment tool. It's as simple as that for me.
My only question, I generally agree with you. My only question for Evan is it really a retention and recruitment tool if we get the compensation piece right?
I would say, well, so certainly in the interviews that I've sat in, the common question we always get is not around the salary. Usually by the time they see the job posting, they know what the salary is going to be. The question is always around the benefit package. They want to know how many vacation days they get, how many sick days they get, but they also want to know about health insurance. Obviously, we're very competitive because we participate in the state program. I think where it could be a growing recruitment and retention tool is as we continue to see surrounding municipalities adopting the 100% employee insurance, knowing what else is out there and that they could get something else somewhere else, or that offer somewhere else, I think is going to increasingly be a recruitment retention effort.
So can we not resolve the 80/20? Somebody want to propose something?
I'd say we go to 90/10 for this year with the hopes of going to 100 in the next year after that. I'm just throwing that out there.
I think that's nickel and diming for the amount that it costs us, and I would stand firm with 100%.
As you said, going to 100% adds 48,000, is that what?
No, that was just,
Absorbing the full 17%,
yeah, the full
70% increase,
17%
right.
for.
above the 4% for employees.
Just this year.
Right.
Increase. Anyone else thoughts?
Again, for the amount of money involved and the message I think it sends to our current employees and also to our future employees of retention, the 100% to me makes a very positive statement. If we don't want to take the ability to invest in our staff and our future staffs, I just think it sends a wrong message. And I would support 100%. We can look for it elsewhere. That may come back to the $5 an hour parking or $4 an hour parking or other increases. But I think, again, one of the greatest assets that we have are our staff, and I think we need to send that message strongly.
And Commissioner Gossett, thank you for saying that again. You are very, very consistent in talking about how great our asset is of our staff, and you're exactly correct. And we should step up and find a way to send every message we can that they are valuable and think about what it actually costs us to replace them.
I think what I'm hearing is in reference to expense reductions, there seems to be leaning toward restoring all those, 5 positions that were proposed for removal, and then changing the health insurance coverage to 100%.
That's where I am.
I accept that.
Any objections? So Evan, if you would have the next budget reflect those changes. Is there anything else?
Could we also, though, add, and I don't know if it's a separate line item, but I think we brought up the donations to the beneficiaries in town, because that 400,000 or whatever that number was needs to be included in this deficit.
So
Why don't we resolve it now? And then we know the number that we need to get the revenue to.
Right, because if it's 400 there, and then that was, what was it, 400, somewhere around 400 that we were asked for, makes that 4.8 million instead of 4 million. So we need to have a realistic number there.
Total request was 395.
Yes.
Yeah, and that
Is that what the
represents.
total is?
Yeah.
395, and that represents an 80,000 increase. So just to review, the fire company last year was 150,000 request. This year, they're $200,000 request. Historical Society last year was 30,000. This year is 60,000. Last year, Main Street was 60,000, and they are consistent with 60,000 asked this year. Ditto for the library, 75,000 requests last year, 75,000 this year. I don't think I have that put it on the.
I mean, is there agreement to just resolve that now so we know the number that we need to?
How do you want to resolve it?
Do we want to include them in the budget or not? Do we need to find the revenue to include them or not?
Well, isn't it predicated on, we have to find the revenue for the other priority issues first?
We're not making a commitment, right?
I wouldn't say it's a commitment. I would say that our intent is to find the revenue if we can, but they are less of a priority than the things that we have in front of us right now.
Right. And I think we should move with all haste for the fire department to move them over to a fee, a fire department fee.
Per household or per
Per
door?
household, or however they might want to approach us. I don't know what would be the barrier to having that philosophy, that everybody supports, everybody pays.
And I agree, but that's not going to happen until next year. So what do we do this year? I'm amenable to give them the extra 50,000. I think they gave us a complete justification. I'm willing to consider, I'm not saying yes yet, but consider the 60,000 ask from Main Street because it equals last year, 75,000 for the library because it equals last year. Historical Society are asking for an extra 60,000 this year. I hesitated on that a little bit. They asked for 30,000 last year, and we have in our 2026 CIP the roof replacement for 150,000. So we contribute a good amount to the museum. So I would say subtract that 30,000, they would get 365,000. If there's a way we come up with an extra 365,000, then that's how I would consider spending it.
So, Mayor, just expand a little on why this fire fee cannot happen this year. We're in February.
Because the budget there's no time to get it done before we have to vote on the budget.
It wouldn't need to happen by the time we vote on the budget. It would just need to be planned to happen in the next fiscal year.
Say it was 10-1 every year or whatever the date is.
I mean, I would, I don't even know the legality of instituting a fee like that.
Well, and
that's why I want to give ourselves time to do this.
I thought it was the fire department who stood right there at the podium and was very supportive of that.
Because that's what they did in the Henlopen Acres, right?
Yeah.
They instituted it.
They've already
so-
done it in the acres.
But again, I don't see it incumbent on us to design this fee structure. The fire department is the one, to me, that needs to bring this forward. you know, they keep coming about a handout, and then, oh, one resolution may be a per door fee, but show me what that is. I just don't understand why we have to figure out how to do it for them. There's a statewide study that has been going on about a statewide fire protection fee, but those results aren't due until the end of 2024. And, you know, it probably won't even look at coming into action until 2025, with the state legislature having to act on it. And those are three different counties are each looking at different priorities. So as the bill reads now, that it is impact on each different county. So we have really no idea what's going to happen. But again, I just don't, I'm not clear, if somebody could explain it to me, why it's up to us to figure this out as opposed to the requesting agency. I'm just not clear on that.
Well, would it be beneficial for us to be clear to them that this is the way we expect to see it next year?
So can I just ask a question? When we talk about fire, do we literally mean just the fire department? Or do we mean fire and EMS?
Both.
Both.
It's the same.
Right.
Sorry? Okay, yeah. I understand, Commissioner Gossett, why you're saying what you're saying, but we're the Board of Commissioners responsible for the services provided in this town. And it feels like this one is essential.
I don't question the essentialness of a fire department and a ambulance service. That's without question, but it is a volunteer service.
Right. And you've just gotten straight to my point. We're asking a volunteer service to volunteer even more to come up with a solution to a budget issue.
Which they've already implemented in Henlopen Acres, and they're looking to other communities for the same thing. So it's a consistency of implication here. Henlopen is a different, I don't want to get in the weeds, but I usually do. Henlopen is all residential. The city of Rehoboth Beach is residential, commercial. So how do you resolve that door fee of, you know, a restaurant that has quite a need for fire suppression systems or what have you, or a kitchen fire versus an apartment? Again, I'm not the one that's going to show up to put out the fire, okay? Those individuals are. So they've got that knowledge and they've got that ability to kind of bring that to the table and say, here's what happens, or here's what doesn't happen. What buildings have fire suppression? What buildings don't? All of that stuff. We'd be shooting in the dark to try to come up with that.
Yeah, that's fair. I just didn't want, I don't want to give the impression that we're somehow not supportive of, in any way, of the services that the essential services that they provide to us. That's all.
But as I think we're seeing here, we can't keep doing things the way we've always been doing it.
Sure.
And
That
again,
much I agree with.
The knowledge of how to make this change should not come from up here. We do not have the knowledge. We could ask for that knowledge or ask for suggestions or what have you, but it just, to me, it has to be a two-way street. Bottom line, they got to have some skin in the game to bring this forward.
So just practically speaking, maybe we don't know the answer to this. Do we think that it's reasonable that they could have something prepared that would allow us to zero out their request by the time that we need to make such a decision?
I think somebody from the fire department is the only one that can answer that question.
I think the reality is we would need to say, hey, we're committed to helping you get a fire,
Protection fee.
Protection fee, from our property owners, of not less than $200,000. But the ball's in your court to make that rolling. And if we're gonna send the bills out on or have them attached to the utility bills as of, January 1 or October 1, the ball's in your court. We're willing to help you, but you have to drive.
So in that instance that you just described, I'm still confused. Are we suggesting that we're going to serve as an administrator of a fee? And can we do that
I think
legally?
it's the only way that it can happen.
Or are we bringing them onto our budget as a line item?
These are very good questions that need to be discussed with the fire department.
We need to have a discussion,
And,
I think.
And, you know, they've come to us and say, we hate to be here begging for this. Well, come with the solution. And that is what I'm questioning, is it an administrative fee? Is it straight pass-through? How do we administer it? Is it all of those questions out there? And if they've addressed it with Henlopen Acres, and I'm sure that this is not a unique situation in the United States, that there are other models out there that we can adapt from. Sure. But again, it is an administrative burden that, you know, do we accept? I mean, maybe we can just pass it through, that there is no administrative fee charge or anything of that nature. But all of these questions are out there.
And this is why I have indicated that it's not going to be done before we vote on this budget. There's just way too many questions. You have excellent questions.
I'm with you.
You know, we do the billing and somebody doesn't pay the bill. Then what are we going to do? We're going to tell the fire department, don't go to their house because they haven't paid their bill? I mean, there's all kinds of questions out there. So we need.
Then I think we're back to the basic question of yes or no, are we going to fund their request this time?
That's where we're at for this year, in my opinion. I've shared with you that I'm willing to go all the same as last year's fees.
I think the fire department's different than the other three.
Yeah.
Say that
And
again.
I think the fire department's different than the other three. I know I was odd person out last time, but I feel that the other three, two of them didn't get their paperwork in on time. And as far as I'm concerned, they move on to the next year's budget. But I was odd man out last time, so.
Well,
I don't think you were odd man
No,
out.
I think you were.
I think I was with you.
Yes.
That in any other governmental entity, you miss, you lose.
You missed the deadline.
Thank you
I
for
don't
coming.
think you were that, I don't think either of you were that articulate. I think
Yes, we were.
I
We didn't
think-
want them to present.
I think we had to infer that from what you said.
No, we did not want them to present.
No, I think they were both pretty clear.
Yeah.
Where
I didn't want to hear from them. They didn't get the paperwork in. But we decided we were nice and we let them speak.
Walter, you want to say something?
Walter Brittingham, 123 Henlopen Avenue. Respectfully, you should have started 3 months earlier on the budget. You're talking about stuff right now that's really serious. You don't have an ordinance in front of you. It's being done wrong. But I'm a life member of the fire company. I'm a past officer. I'm not allowed to ride anymore. That's a whole separate issue. But 2 years ago, fire company gave away for $1 a rescue truck, a perfectly good rescue truck bought with public funds. They gave it to Newcastle County Dive Team. They drove it down here for the function the other night. They gave a fire truck out west in the past year, just gave it away, loaded it up with stuff and sent it out there. They're already talking about ordering another truck. And we have a fine fire company and we got a lot of dedicated people over there. I don't show up, I'm not supposed to, for health reasons. But whether it be the fire company or anything else, all of these things have value. The fire company is just beyond, you don't know what the fire company used to do. We built the firehouses, physically built the firehouses other than the brickwork. We did the electric and all, but it's got nothing to do with it. The whole thing here, these 3-4 subjects, this should not be it. We should be going home, have lunch, and come back to do the next meeting. But this is too late to be doing this because it won't get done well. Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, yes, ma'am. Come ahead.
Carolyn Diefendorfer, city resident. If this building catches on fire, I'm assuming you all want them to come over here and put out the fire. So I'm 100% behind a per property fee, I think $100 a year, whatever. It needs to be a decent number. I think there are a lot of people that come here that don't understand the fire department is volunteer. They come from places where the fire departments are not volunteer. But when you're talking about all this and talking about whether to give donations or not, I think you have to keep in mind that you want them to come here if this building catches on fire. That'd be the one thing. The other thing is, I didn't have time to go back and listen, but I believe when you all first started talking about the formal grant requests, that it was said, we're going to come up with this list of things, and if you turn something in and something is missing, we will let you know and give you an opportunity to supplement. So, like I said, I didn't get a chance to go back and listen, but I do believe that was said at one of the early meetings. And it is the first year of this, so I think you need to consider that. Thank you.
Thank you, Carolyn. Well, it sounds like we've got differing views here that maybe this is, we adhere to our program, and at budget meeting 4 or 5, we put this on for a vote. Maybe it's got to be budget number 5, because that's just all the loose ends there that we'll be looking at.
Is it possible, though, that Evan could put it on the, I'll call it the page 1 for next go-around, so that we can at least see it?
That would be my suggestion, is if you could add that to the surplus deficit figure, but then under expense reductions, list the 4 grant applications.
So we do have, actually, in the general fund expenditures, we have dedicated accounts for those contributions. I have, based off this discussion, I have added those figures into those contribution accounts, which adds to the deficit number at the top. If you'd prefer that I list them separately underneath the expense reductions, I can do that as well.
That would be helpful to see
Sure.
it.
Can you just give us the total, though, now?
The total
But what number is he using for these?
for the contributions?
Yeah.
395, right?
Yeah, the 395 is.
Everything?
Which
Yep.
is the everything?
So with,
Like I said, I was not
What does that
amenable
bring
to
the
the
deficit up to then?
60,000 for the Historical Society.
so eliminating any of the possible expense reductions that were in there, the personnel and the 80/20, and then putting in the roughly 400,000 for contributions, the deficit now is $4,425,724. If you incorporate the revenue increases, the deficit is $686,000.
Say that again, 600.
And $86,133. I have just one.
Do we have but we still need a figure for,
Those other 5
well,
positions, right?
No, he
He
included.
did, he did
I've-
that.
You
Yeah.
rolled those in there, right? The 411.
Yep.
So did I understand you say we come out with a surplus of 686?
A deficit of
Deficit
686.
686.
I do have just one comment, more so food for thought, based on the public comment about $4 an hour. One thing, this goes to, again, my brain in terms of how the staff operates and how we function. So you'll recall we do have 30-minute meters in the city. At $3.75, it's a fraction of a penny would be 30 minutes. So in thinking through this, I believe through T2, our pay station company, for a credit card transaction, it would have to round up to the closest nickel. But for quarters, the parker would have to purchase either 28 minutes worth of time or 32 minutes worth of time. They're not going to be able to purchase exactly 30 minutes.
Can we just simplify it then? And charge $4 or $5?
I think that's where he was going.
That the $4 would make it easier for us from the
Thank you,
configuration
Evan.
standpoint. So
That's a significant increase.
I mean,
Yeah,
basically,
significant
would like the minimum increment change be 50 cents? Or would that create a problem? I'm not saying that. I'm just saying
You
you
just
can't
did
make it
say
a
it,
quarter.
Commissioner.
You can't make it a
You
quarter.
said that's a lot.
You
Does
know,
that mean that's
so,
good? or
I mean, make it one of
It's
the.
just a very significant change without, in my mind, It's a significant change that could have an impact that that the public has not digested yet. Specifically those in the downtown business community. That's my only concern. That's why I wanted to do a more gradual, hey, we're doing something this year, but there may be a significant change next year. But we're gonna start talking about that soon, and it's gonna be well in advance of next
So
year.
what are you thinking about, 350?
I mean, that's what I felt comfortable with. If everyone was on board with 375, I'm good with that. I think once you get a 4 in front of it and it's a whole dollar change, the perception of that is just very different.
Well, then if that's the way we decide to go, then let's remind ourselves that we had this discussion when we get to other areas where we're increasing costs for residents, and remind ourselves that we decided not to do it, that we're going to shift the burden to somewhere else.
This is all fluid.
One practical question, Evan, on the 30-minute meter. Can we just set it 30 minutes is $2? You buy 30 minutes, you use 28, you use 10, whatever, it's $2 to park there for 30 minutes.
So it can have a different fee structure than the rest of them.
It cannot, because there's no way to distinguish which spots are 30 minutes.
So
There's one zone.
we have separate rates now. So we have anywhere from 0 to an hour, because for coins, every coin you put in, you get that number of minutes, that minute increment. So we do have the option the person parking has the option to purchase 30 minutes worth of time, whether it's through the credit card or through the coins. Also in Park Mobile, our minimum increment is 30 minutes. So you cannot purchase less than 30 minutes worth of time.
So just a flat $2 for 30 minutes, is that in the 30-minute meters, is that doable or not? So you don't get into the 28, 32 kind of thing?
I think it is. It just requires a little bit more thought.
Please,
in my brain.
take your time, but I
Yeah.
would look at that as an option.
Yeah.
But Evan, we don't know who's parked in a 30-minute spot. It's not like the 30-minute spots have their own,
Correct.
besides a sign, there's no designation.
Right. Oh, so I think what you're getting to, Commissioner, is previously with the parking meters we had for the 30-minute spaces, they were their own zone. You could only purchase 30 minutes worth of time, that was it. What we have transitioned to is we allow people to purchase as much time as they want, but it's on the enforcement officers to enforce the 30 minutes. So they can purchase an hour's worth of time. The parker, whoever's visiting the space, it's up to them to only purchase 30 minutes worth of time. Right. And then we will chalk the tires and come back 30 minutes later and enforce it that way.
So what Commissioner Gossett is suggesting cannot happen.
Not practical then.
Is not practical.
Unless it would be practical, we would just have to create a whole separate rate for it.
Well then, yeah, I'm just trying to make it easier. Obviously, that's not the case, so they get 2 minutes free.
It gets really muddy, especially with the way that the code is currently written, and this will probably come up later, because we say what the rate is per hour, but we also say what minute increment you will get for 25 cents. So at 375, again, you when you start talking about some of these rates, you're talking about fractions of a penny. You're also talking about seconds and not whole minutes with those increments. So it gets a little complicated from that standpoint.
One last question on the public comment. The wastewater fee was brought up. Is that something that you guys considered at all? Increasing, not the wastewater, the water fee. Is that something that came up that you guys looked at?
The reason I didn't recommend it was because the water fund as a separate entity produces $1 million profit. So the idea behind water fees is supposed to cover the cost of operating a department. It's not supposed to be a revenue source like a government. So if you raise the water fees, yeah, we'll generate more money. We'll generate an even greater surplus than we already have. So.
And can that be used in the general fund, or it's an enterprise fund? And
it's an enterprise fund, and yes, you can transfer that money. I think.
Is there any way to make a modest increase on the out-of-town rate and leave the in-town rate alone?
Well, I think, is the code 2.5 times or 2 times the limit? I have to check on that, but I think there is a limit on how much you can raise the out-of-town fee.
Can you just take a look at that for the next meeting?
Sure. Yeah. Currently, I mean, we charge double, but whether we could go 2.5 times, I have to check that.
Well, just help us get $700,000 somehow.
Evan, is there anything else you want from us?
No, I don't think so. The only, I guess, I want to just quickly explain the rationale for the 25% increase on the permit type table. Again, when we were talking about going from $3 an hour to $3.50, that was a 20% increase because we were later considering $3 to $3.75. That's 25%, so that's why I included the 25% increase on the permit fee chart as well. So.
Add to the analysis, if we went to $4 an hour, what would that percentage be?
33%, so I would have to recompute those numbers.
And I don't think you came up with what the aggregate would be, the total budget impact if we did 25 instead of 20, right?
So for permit, in terms of estimated revenue for permit increases?
Yeah.
So right now we have increased parking permits, 20% is 200,000, so it would be 250,000. So another 50,000, and then.
So then it would be just over 275 roughly if we went to
33%.
Anything else?
No.
Thank you very much. With that, I'm going to see if there's any citizen comments, and then we'll adjourn. Anybody? All satisfied? Thank you very much. In that case, I adjourn this meeting at 12:46 p.m. We'll see you back in this room at 2 o'clock.